Well, good evening, and welcome to the Salem City Council work session on the Salem Community Improvement Bond. It's May 16th, and we'll get underway if the recorder please call a roll.
Councillor Stapleton?
Here.
Councillor Anderson?
Here.
Councillor Phillips?
Here.
Councillor Leung?
Here.
Councillor Gonzalez? Absent. Councillor Hoy?
Here.
Councillor Nordyke?
Here.
Councillor Varney?
Here.
And Mayor Bennett?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Phillips, you want to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy, a motion to approve the special meeting agenda.
I move approval of the special meeting agenda.
Second.
Second by Stapleton. Any discussion? Okay, if the recorder please call a roll.
Councillor Stapleton?
Aye.
Councillor Anderson?
Aye.
Councillor Phillips?
Aye.
Councillor Leung?
Aye.
Councillor Gonzalez is absent. Councillor Hoy?
Aye.
Councillor Nordyke?
Aye.
Councillor Varney?
Aye.
And Mayor Bennett?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. And now any additions or deletions? Councillor?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll begin then with public comment. I want to remind folks making comment tonight, you have 3 minutes. And we'd like you to begin with your name and either your ward or address, please. And we'll start off with Baird Mentrum.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Bayard Mentrum, Chair of Northgate. Last Wednesday, a bunch of our neighbors got together and talked about our heartfelt need for speed bumps in residential streets. So we're here again tonight to talk about that. And we have another idea after listening to the police issue with taking a lot of time away from the police with accident reports. If we had speed bumps on residential streets, obviously it slows down traffic and it would allow for less accidents and less work for the police. So actually we'd be helping the police out also. And then that was one great idea we had, I thought. The city, the neighborhood associations, we got together, working together, and that's what we thought the city wanted. And we were asked about 2 months ago what opinions we had on spending the proposed bond measure money. And after seeing that half of the money was going to go toward possibly bike lanes and streets and sidewalk repairs, we wanted to talk about having more bike lanes put in that money, because that's about $300 million if it passes. There's already $700 million proposed in the upcoming budget. So you're talking about $1 billion or more of money. So the speed bumps would really be, 15 to 20,000 to at least get some of the streets done. And it would save a lot of lives and protect children and protect the police from having to work. So we're asking tonight to actually someone say that we put this budget for the bikes into the budget for once. Last Wednesday, nobody really said anything. There's just comment about the Neighborhood Solutions. There's money there, but it's being held up by some report. We don't know when that's going to happen, but time's ticking away. So we're trying to get somebody to say, yes, it can be in the in the bond measure or the funding for the city. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Baird. Baird, could you do me a favor and adjust your computer so we can see you? We push There we go. Because
Yeah.
next.
I was sleeping.
It's nice to see you, but we wanted to be sure we could see Kate, okay?
He was talking in his
Are there
sleep.
any questions? Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Put Kate on now.
I'm next, right?
You're next.
Okay.
Now turn that screen so we can see.
All right.
There we go. There we go.
I'm
Little
going to
more.
read it out because that way I can get a lot more said than just trying to remember everything.
Remember your name and neighborhood.
Yes. My name is Kate Mentrum, and how are you? I hope you're all doing fine. I understand bike lanes are important to many of the city councilors for health and happiness. I understand that some people in south of Salem especially feel the need for the whole of Salem to be bike lane for their happiness and believe that money for such can be had from the possibility of the infrastructure funding from the federal government. Some sidewalks may need help, but we can keep them simple, not elaborate. What I am asking for is to share some of the funding from the infrastructure bond measure you can come up with by giving the first 5 streets, namely Storts, 31st, Edgewood, Brooks, and Jade, speed bumps to slow down traffic speed violators. These speeding drivers use our straight residential roads to cross over to Portland Road to get on I-5 or returning from Portland Road. These are now dangerous through roads instead of just residential roads. The cameras are expensive upkeep and more personnel involvement is necessary and will not necessarily slow them down. And obviously, these speeding drivers ignore the speeding limit signs anyway. Those mentioned residential roads are ones with young children. By the way, Storts has already been approved by for speed bumps by ODOT. The steering committee the mayor selected were good counselors, but only one went for speed humps because he knew we needed them. He even took the time, researched, and came up with recycled ones, which are fire truck friendly, plus not as costly as the others. I remember congratulating our councilor Jose when city councilors approved the possibility of installing speed bumps about 2 months ago. However, it seems at the budget committee meeting last week, although there is money in the neighborhood solutions account, this money is still being stalled for now and could be redirected. If there is no other money left over, as you say, we ask to use it for speed humps as priority and soon. Please do not take this attitude as if our request is not important enough or considered secondary. Please tell me I am wrong to feel that we are being discriminated by some of you. I hope some of you are not thinking Northgate is not important enough. After our testimonies, when speed bumps were not acknowledged by any of the councilors at the budget committee meeting of May 11th, honestly speaking, it made me wonder if that is because Northgate consists mostly of a working class community that you can just look away
Thanks,
and
Kate.
pretend
Your
we do
time's
not.
up. Kate, time's up. Thank you very much. Any questions for Kate? I will assure you, no one is thinking or suggesting in any way there's a
I'm hoping so.
Yeah, you're right. You're correct. We're not. Trevor.
Yeah, thank you for being here and providing testimony tonight. Does the North Gateway community have a sense of how many speed humps would be beneficial to preventing some of the speeding with the cut through between those 2 major roads?
Okay, there are actually about 5 roads times 2, maybe 2 per road, let's say. So that's about 5,000. 10
speed bumps altogether.
Yes.
Okay.
And Jose came up with some recycled, cheaper versions. So we thought that might be good for you to think about anyway.
I think at that council meeting you mentioned with Jose, the council actually started moving that through. That at least is.
That's right.
Yeah, it was approved with a majority. I remember that
That's
too.
what I thought. Yeah, nobody's ignoring this. This is
I'm glad to
one
hear
we're working
that.
on.
I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, it's something that's often a kind of a meme out of our north neighborhoods, those of us that live there over the years. And in this case, not so. It's moving right along, I think.
Okay,
We
great.
just haven't heard anybody saying it's.
And we'll move along. I don't know who's talking, so
Sorry.
keep it. Someone hasn't turned you off yet. Okay, Phyllis Kavoda. Phyllis, you're on mute.
Unmute. Okay, I just got the message. Yeah, my name is Phyllis Abbott Kavoda, and I live at 2690 Brooks Avenue Northeast. And that section of Brooks, the section that I live on, runs north and south. And on the north end, we have a big warehouse and also the Gypsy Jokers. And there is a speed limit sign there, but like the semi drivers will just accelerate from the warehouse to Pine Street. And, you know, of course, the Gypsy Jokers do the same. Now, on my side, I'm on the south side of Pine Street. What I get are not only, you know, motorcycles, but other drivers speeding down the straightaway to Circle K. And the 50 Plus Center is right on the corner of Brooks and Highland, and then the Circle K, used to be Circle K, 7-Eleven is right across the street. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic there, and on the north side of Brooks, there's a whole apartment house full of kids, and I see them walking, all the time, mostly to Circle K. I go again. But at any rate, I think some speed humps to just slow down, to just slow the vehicles down could really save a life. Otherwise, I think there's just a tragedy waiting to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay. Bill
Mayor,
Carter.
I had one.
Oh,
Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't see your little hand go.
It's okay. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis, for coming down. I have never heard of the phrase or whatnot of, I think you said Gypsy Jokers, and I was just wondering if maybe you could explain that. I'm a little lost. I'm just trying to understand.
Okay. On Brooks Avenue, north of Pine Street, maybe, I'm not very good with distance, a few blocks, maybe I'm just going to say, there is a compound that is owned and operated by the Gypsy Jokers.
It's a motorcycle club.
Motorcycle group.
Okay.
That's why there's motorcycle traffic.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyone else? Bill Carver.
Good evening, councilors, mayor, and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Philip Carver, and I represent 350 Salem, and our members are all over Salem. And you've gotten a lot of comments about the Salem Bike Vision in support of that, and that's what I'm here to testify for. And I'm also here to endorse the comments of Lori Doherty related to fire trucks. I've listened to the fire chief talk about his plans for buying only diesel fire trucks for the next 10 years. And I can tell you he is not up to speed on what's out there. And many cities are buying either non-large or non-diesel fire equipment. And that is really something the city needs to get up to speed on. And so please review Lori Doherty's comments on behalf of 350 Salem. I have two basic messages about the Salem Bike Vision. One is that it's a health and safety measure. This is about killing people and injuring people. And it's not okay for it to just be another trading chip between counselors. You all need to get together and trade the chips and get the Bike Vision on the bond. Everybody likes to talk about the police and fire department because that's public safety. Well, not injuring bikers and not killing bicyclists is public health and safety. And it's not okay to have it just be another shit to be traded or to be left on the table because the counselors can't decide whose projects need to be trimmed. You can all get together and work on this. The other aspect of this is that it makes Salem more livable. If we make bikes safer, then more people will ride bikes. As an energy professional for 37 years, I can tell you that safety is the number one concern of bicyclists. And then finally, there's many other benefits: air quality, reduction of congestion, and many other benefits besides greenhouse gas emission reductions. And finally, let me talk about the politics. 350 Salem will not oppose the bond measure, period. But we cannot be enthusiastic about it if it doesn't have the Bike Vision. And enthusiasm is going to be the deciding factor in the November election. It's an off-year, non-presidential election, and getting people to vote is going to be key. And enthusiasm is going to be extremely important. And so pay attention. And I'd like to have the Bike Vision on the surveys for the public information that you're going to gain from your consultants to measure the support for that, because I think the support will be very strong. Thank you again for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Phil. Virginia?
Thank you so much. Phil, so good to see you. Thanks for coming down. Yeah, it is my goal to try and get a bucket for bike lanes in the bond. And the Salem Bike Vision is obviously something that I'm very passionate about and hope to work hard over the summer and fall and the coming year to see that gets adopted within the city's transportation package. And I do hope that we can count on Salem, 350 Salem to come and be alongside us as we look at our transportation master plan update as well, because I know that you care about that deeply. And so I hope that we can get some money set aside in the bond for bike lanes and connecting them. Right now we're scattered around, right? I think we have 8 miles citywide of protected bike lanes, and not all of them are connected to each other. And so we have some missing links that I'm really hoping we can work hard in this bond package to connect. So thank you so much for your support, for your group's support of this. And I'm glad to hear that you won't be opposing the bond. And I hope that I can work hard here to gain the enthusiasm that you are promising as well, if we can try and get this all pulled together. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The transportation system plan is where the Bike Vision will be created, and 350 Salem will be very active in the transportation system plan as we were in the our Salem comprehensive land use adjustments. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Shepke, please.
Thank you, Mayor Bennett and councilors. Jim Shepke, Ward 2. And I want to thank the subcommittee for recommending the 2 branch libraries be included in the bond measure. And I wanted to share this with the councilors who weren't on the committee, because I want to show you an example of a branch library combined with affordable housing, which is what the proposal is for 2 of these, one in Northeast and one in South, affordable or low income housing. And we have a terrific example of this just up the road in Cornelius. It's a public-private partnership. This isn't a branch library, it's a main library. So it's about twice the size. It's 13,500 square feet. A branch library is more like 7. But you can see that the cost was very reasonable, and combining a branch library with housing brings the cost way down for the library. So it's a smart thing to do. This project, the city owned the land. They contracted with Bridge Development, a nonprofit, low-income housing developer that builds up and down the West Coast. And they built it, and the library occupies the bottom floor there. So it's a terrific project. And I think if we could do something like this in Salem, it would really be fantastic. This has a courtyard where there's a farmer's market. It has a recreation center added to it. It has a coffee shop. It's a real community center for Cornelius. And I think we need a community center both in Northeast and South Salem. And just to close, I wanted to show you that this is a trend that's all over the United States now, to build libraries with housing. And here's 6 projects. It's not a new idea. The Hollywood Library that you see up in the corner here was built 20 years ago in Portland. And it has the bookmark apartments on top of the library. How about that? And then you have 3 projects here in Chicago. I put those on here for Councilor Anderson. We have a Mission Bay branch in San Francisco and a branch in Milwaukee. So this is happening all over the country. And I certainly hope that Salem can join in this trend and we can do something really fantastic for Northeast and South Salem. Thank you.
Well, we're on our way, Jim. I think we've got it coming. I think to council as a project. It's actually been vetted, talked about. I think you'll be pleased. Anyone else? Okay. Steve Anderson.
Good evening, Mayor. I want to share a screen with you real quick here. I'll say, so Steve Anderson, Ward 8. I want to speak about Marine Drive just a little bit as the new road and the alignment from Herritt via 5th Avenue to Tabin that was proposed by the Budget Committee. And you have this in your packet. I sent it to you. But basically, back in 1997, Marine Drive was in the Salem Transportation System Plan. As part of that first bullet, the Marine Drive was envisioned as a spine for local access and circulation, and the 5th Avenue link was considered an acceptable preferred alternative to the other alternative. Just background, a group of people in the West Salem neighborhood, Councilor Lewis and Councilor Kaiser, business leaders and stuff, got to level up at the local level to talk about what we're going to do with the remaining part of the bond. We discussed the pros and cons of that. We looked at riparian areas and other issues. That's in slide 5. As we went there, we had an idea. We took it to the neighborhood association and gathered community support. We looked at pros and cons, and Marine Drive was a priority of the neighborhood association back then. And so you look at that, this green alignment is what's being talked about here. You can see the riparian area over by the park. The other alignment is still there. And this was the proposal of the cost benefits or the changes between the local access and the regional access for your review later as you consider this. And what happened is we worked with Councilor Kaiser. She brought a motion to City Council to use the bond funds to purchase right-of-way from Marine Drive from Herritt to 5th Avenue along to Tabin. The idea was to purchase the right-of-way when land was cheaper than wait. This was supported in August of 2017 by the Neighborhood Association. Councilor Kaiser's motion in 2020 was passed by the City Council and supported. And this alignment is supported by the Salem Bond Committee in 2022 of April. And so what we're looking at here is coming from Herritt to point B. This is the intersection of 5th Avenue and the old Marine Drive alignment coming down to point 8 via 5th Street up to Tabin. What was added in the bond group is this leg over here will be a exclusive bike and pedestrian path. And so we support, well, the community supported this. There's an alignment here that the bond committee sent to you. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. Marine Drive has been an interest since 2017. We think that this Herritt to 5th Avenue to Tabin is a great alignment. It benefits the community at this time. It doesn't say no to the other parts of the alignment, but it's a good start.
Steve. Appreciate your comment.
Thank you, Mayor.
Any questions? Okay, Jesus Cruz.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Jose, I'm sorry, I read it wrong.
No, it's Jesus. Jesse.
Oh, it's showing up as Jose. There.
I know, I've seen that. But anyways, my name's Jesus Cruz. I belong to the North Gate. And my concern is the speed bumps. I was a creator of the petition, which start my video. I don't know later. I don't know. It's telling me some. Anyway, I was a creator of the petition of 99% of Stork Street or Avenue between Portland Road and Williams. I collected 99%. And as I proceed, or as we proceed this petition, we have discovered there's so many other streets that need these speed bumps, you know, and that's really a concern. And I believe that we can work with the fire department by getting the right ones so they won't hold them back, you know, because their goal is to save lives, but so are we. We're trying to save lives too. We have had 4 that I know of accidents because of speeders out here. And 2 of them are from a neighbor right across the street, you know. But anyways, I'd like you to consider, I don't know, Mayor, what was the conclusion of that? What was it, investigation from the last meeting you had where the speed bumps were approved to, or be modified, but there was some concern about the fire department? There was going to be a study made. Do you know anything about it? Is that going to hold us up?
I don't remember. Does anyone else remember that, how that came out? Chris, what happened there?
As I recall, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I recall, we referred it to staff when they are in the middle of that process currently, and there hasn't been a resolution. They'll be returning to council at some point in the very near future, I think, with a staff report that will outline their findings. They're out looking for ways to accommodate the fire department and to be able to, and they'll also outline a new process for acquiring speed humps. So that's all in the works. We just haven't heard back yet on what that's going to look like specifically, but that's what we're anticipating.
Did you feel that was that we had a pretty positive, I thought we had pretty positive feedback on that. I mean,
I think it was a unanimous vote by city council. I think that as I read the room, I think everybody's supportive of it. Yeah. And I actually addressed the Northgate Neighborhood Association recently on this and explained the whole thing to them, just like we're talking about here, that was in process and that there would be opportunities for different neighborhoods to acquire speed humps in the future. Yeah. But we don't have it yet.
Yeah, but it will, as it's kind of proceeding, it's going to simplify this process where, I think, Jesus, we're looking pretty good on this issue.
Okay.
So, and we appreciate hearing from you all again.
We got someone wants to talk.
Well, that someone isn't signed up, I'm afraid. so tell him to
talking about Anderson
there for a minute.
He's talking about Councilor Anderson, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, Anderson wants to speak. Okay. Okay, what do you want?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I'll try to sign up for the next meeting.
I'm sorry, I didn't see.
No, I know, Mr. Mayor. No need to, no worries. I agree with Councilor Hoy, and for Mr. Cruz and the other folks who testified, the Mentrums, et cetera, this is an issue that affects all neighborhoods. And I know in Scan neighborhood and my ward, it's really important too. And it's the same sort of thing. In Scan, it's High Street, cars avoiding the Liberty commercial couplet come down High Street. And so I know we've been working on that in the Scan neighborhood too.
Yeah, I know on my street, it's 16th Street. I think on Virginia's, isn't it, which one's yours? Summer? Capitol? I can't remember.
Yeah, Summer and Capitol.
Yeah, they want them.
No, that would never happen on Summer and Capitol. But
yeah, you never know. Never know. Don't give up. Okay, Mercedes Hamilton.
Hello all, my name is Mercedes Hamilton and I've just completed my third year at Willamette University. This past semester, I've had the opportunity to research the importance of increasing Salem's library accessibility for my Politics, Policy, Law, and Ethics capstone project. In my group's research, we have found that Salem is not prioritizing its libraries in a way equitable to the increasing population. According to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the national average is 2.9 libraries per 100,000 persons. With the current Salem population, we should have about 5 libraries, and yet we only have 2. We do not have enough libraries to support the population, and the current existing libraries do not have resources equitable to the population. 17.1% of Salem's population is Spanish speaking, and yet only 3.3% of the books in the library system are in Spanish. A good library serves everyone, but they really need to reflect the community they are located in. With as diverse as Salem is now and will continue to become, we as a whole community need to have enough libraries that are able to reflect more of the characteristics of the areas they represent. It is difficult for a space to reflect the character of its patrons when only a small percentage of the population is utilizing the existing libraries. Salem needs additional libraries that reflect the needs of the diverse population of Salem. There are additional gaps in the national library system in which there are discrepancies between the distance people must travel to access the library and limited public transportation options for that population. We see this issue in Salem too. The people in Northeast Salem and further South Salem are not within walking distance to our public libraries and must rely on other transportation options, but those may not be accessible to them. Public libraries are the only indoor space for people to exist in with no expectation of spending money or a specific amount of time, so it appeals to a diverse array of socioeconomic backgrounds. Libraries are sheltered spaces that protect communities from various weather conditions. But most importantly, libraries are public spaces that provide free resources and services for all. In an increasingly digital world, libraries remain open and hold significance throughout the country because they provide services in space that can't completely be seen online. Utilizing some of the $10 million Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund will generate the public-private partnership we need in Salem to create more affordable housing and more accessibility for public libraries in the community. We've seen success with this concept in Cornelius, Oregon, and we too can choose to prioritize affordable housing and public library accessibility in Salem by utilizing this bond measure to achieve this goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. Did you submit written testimony, your report, or anything like that to us?
I did not, but I can.
Why don't you? That's really good. I think we'd all like to see your research and see what you came up with. It has some real interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really interesting suggestions. So I just suggest you send it to each of us and let us have a look at it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, very informative. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on then to Matthew Hale.
All right, good evening, Mayor and City Councilors. I'm Matt Hale from Ward number 4. I'm here tonight to ask you to take action to help and not hurt Salem taxpayers. I urge you to only consider essential items listed in your proposed bond. I'd like to just remind everyone that already in the last several years, the Salem City Council passed the operations fee, which is almost like a permanent bond. It's designed to also increase with inflation. And that's costing each homeowner about $100 a year. And that's on your monthly water bills. And second, please consider that optimism in the direction the city is heading continues to decline, according to your own 2021 survey. In fact, that survey mentions a majority, 57% of respondents, say the decline can be attributed to city actions, and 56% of those people are not satisfied with the value they receive for taxes and fees paid. I ask that you build back confidence in local government and modify your bond proposal to a bare minimum that addresses critical safety areas. Consider the 26 million for fire engines and equipment with the 14 million for future fire stations is one small bond. And additionally, you could separate out the 39.4 million for Civic Center earthquake safety into a separate bond measure. But please, that's it. No more than those two small bonds. And third, Salem taxpayers need a break. Persistent and entrenched inflation is a painful, regressive tax. And according to Bloomberg News, just this March, inflation means the average U.S. household has to spend an extra $5,200 this year. That number is likely to be even larger next year. In 2018, according to the Salem Reporter, average property taxes in Salem and Kaiser rose 11% due to the new school bond and library bonds and increasing property values across the region. Just doing the math, in the last 5 years, Salem taxpayers have seen a 20% increase in their property taxes. And for the most part, those bonds don't even begin to expire until the year 2048. So finally, please just focus on the absolute and essential priorities for our city. According to the Pew Research Center, just this month in May, 7 in 10 Americans, at 70% of Americans, view inflation as a very big problem for our country. Salem taxpayers in this multi-year, persistent, and crushing inflationary environment can't afford more taxes, but really could use a much-deserved tax break. Two small bonds for safety measures, fire and earthquake prevention, are likely to pass in our city. But this large...
Thank you, Mr. Hale. I appreciate it. Anyone have any questions? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think your message was very clear. Thank you. Donald Davis.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So my name is Donald Davis. I'm just here to speak about the bond. I just want to encourage you to consider adding the bicycle infrastructure as described as the bike vision plan that was entered into testimony. I just today, as I was going into work, saw a family utilizing the sidewalks in order with 3 young children on bicycles with their 2 parents following behind them. This shows that there is a great demand for safe bicycle infrastructure in the city of Salem that is currently not being addressed or provided. So I feel that this, providing these bicycle pathways will help ensure that we are addressing the needs of all the community and making it so that we are more resistant to these inflationary pressures due to increased gas prices and vehicle expenses. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Okay. Anyone? Nope. Hey, thank you very much, Mr. Davis. That's everyone signed up. So we'll move on, and I'm going to turn it over to Josh Eggleston to kind of take us through all this. Before we start, I do want to make one comment. I told Courtney Knox Bush at the beginning, I want to say it to all of you, if you haven't had a chance, and I'm sure all of you had, but the public may want to take a look at this well, was her report on this project, on the bond engagement project. I thought it was just excellent as a concise, straightforward statement of what's happened and what this bond measure contemplates. I just thought it was really quite good. We see a lot of reports. I thought this one just took a very complicated topic and made it very understandable. So just recommend it to you. Okay. Go ahead, Josh. You going to complicate this thing or are you going to make it simple?
I'm going to try to keep it simple.
Excellent.
Good evening, Mayor and City Councilors. Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. I'll be doing an overview of the bond package as recommended by the Infrastructure Bond Steering Committee. And then also department staff are also available for specific questions or discussion as we walk through each of the areas. So feel free to ask questions as we go through the presentation and we can always go back if we need to. First, a little background on the overall concept. The city is considering a general obligation bond, which is restricted to capital projects, capital construction. The authorization would be for $300 million to be issued over the next 10 years, which would allow us to maintain an estimated level levy rate of $1.20 per thousand of assessed value, which is the current tax rate. And then I'm actually going to have Courtney is going to go over this slide.
Thank you, Mayor Bennett, for the kind words. This is Courtney Knox-Bush. I'm in the city manager's office, and I'm just going to share a bit about the engagement that we've accomplished to date. Just a quick reminder that we started in October of 21 with a report to the City Council in a work session. We shared out the results of the September 21 focus groups, which in general showed support for a multi-purpose community livability bond measure. And we also saw some evidence as that more outreach and education would help the measure. That same night, City Council formed the steering committee, which 5 of you participate on. Thank you so much for your additional time. And we directed staff to begin outreach. The steering committee has met 7 times, December to April, and considered input from a variety of sources, which are summarized in the report before you this evening. The steering committee developed some criteria for including projects and in summary built its recommendation to the council, which is the subject of tonight's work session. We also conducted a poll in January, which showed that voters really seem to understand the state of current infrastructure and see conditions continuing to get worse. We also understand that the top priorities, according to the poll, are streets and sidewalks. That's repair and maintenance to those facilities. Second tier priorities are purchasing land for affordable housing and building new streets and sidewalks and replacing the aging fire engines and equipment. Support for the measure, and as a result of this poll, it really gets up to 60% from 49 at the beginning of the poll, gets up to 60% as people learn that there are not going to be any changes to their tax rates. There's also some summaries of some community input and a bunch of neighborhood and board and commission briefings and testimony at the council. We also had 225 responses with a whole bunch of project ideas. And you can see on page 6 of the report, you can see how those ideas really translate directly into the recommended package. You can see references to new or missing sidewalk connections and replacing some sidewalks in older neighborhoods. There's an emphasis on school, safer crossings for park and school access. You can also see some bike lanes in the east and west direction. You can see the branch libraries, which we heard about in testimony this evening. You can see adding play and sport courts, shelters, and restrooms in our parks. You can see more affordable housing and an opportunity fund that helps to incent additional affordable housing. And you can see specific projects on McGilchrist, Pringle Road, State Street Corridor. You can see some funding for the Pringle Creek Trail connection. And you can see some also the Marine Drive project, which we heard about just recently. So that's a summary of the input so far, and we look forward to hearing more. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Courtney. You heard a little bit about this, but for project selection, the community input, as Courtney said, 225 responses with multiple projects. Staff input, so there's staff groups that talked about each category of infrastructure, walked through all the submissions, put together project lists that were existing and from other groups, and then filtered it through CIP scoring, including other factors such as climate equity. And then, of course, the steering committee discussion further filtered those projects that were selected for inclusion in the package before you tonight, which is $300 million. The largest portion is for streets and sidewalks, 157.1. As you heard about Civic Center earthquake safety, park upgrades, technology and cybersecurity, sites for affordable housing, library branches, affordable housing opportunity funds, fire engines and equipment, and future fire stations. This did look a lot different at the beginning of the steering committee process, so I was very glad to see the changes and the beneficial pieces they were able to modify it to. And then just walking through each category, and this is where if you have questions, feel free to chime in. We want to make sure we answer any of them if you're not familiar with the package and the pieces here. So on this first slide, bicycle and pedestrian highlights, State Street, 13th Street to 17th Street Northeast, the Pringle Creek Path, as Courtney mentioned, and then Liberty Street Northeast and Church Street Bridge railings. This was originally just a bridge project, but it's really pedestrian safety, which is why it ended up in this category. For sidewalks, we really have three different categories here. Safer pedestrian crossings, which is really for those improvements to improve pedestrian safety. And then specifically for sidewalks, we have sidewalk infill for pedestrian connectivity, and then sidewalk replacement. And these are buckets of funding. So what that does is there's a set aside of a certain amount of funds for a particular group of projects like sidewalk infill. And then after the bond passes, when that funding is available, it would come back to the council to identify the specific projects. I do see a hand raised.
Yeah, Josh, it's Tom Anderson. Could you put the previous slide back up on the screen, please?
Certainly.
Yeah, I've got one comment and a question. First comment is I am extremely delighted to see what I call the hanging bridge there under Commercial Street included in the bond project. That's terrific. I've been asking about this for years. The other thing is the State Street improvements, and I don't know, maybe the planning people or Public Works could talk about this more, but is that part of the State Street improvement project that we were looked at several years ago and finally adopted? Is this the first part of it coming to fruition?
Yeah, Mayor Peter Fernandez. Yes, it is, Councilor.
Terrific. I'm glad to hear that, Director Fernandez. Then I've got one other question as long as we're on the bike stuff. Another thing I've been talking about for not as long as the hanging bridge is some sort of protected bike lanes on McGillcrest going east-west there. And I don't know if I know the McGillcrest project is in there. I don't know if that includes some sort of more sheltered bike paths.
Yes, Councilor. We have, in fact, we undertook a slight redesign of the project to make all of the bike facilities there buffered bike lanes, buffered bike lanes.
Thank you very much for both these. Well, actually, all three: State Street, the hanging bridge, and protect the bike lanes. Thank you very much, Director Fernandez.
Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question. On the Pringle Creek Path, the other half of the funding for this is going to be from the URA grant. And it's my understanding that that is going to take about 10 years to get the money in that urban renewal area, if I'm saying it right, in order to meet the other half of that project. Does that mean that this project won't go forward for 10 years?
Excellent question. And just to clarify, so it's in South Waterfront URA, and we're still waiting for that tax increment to collect so we can actually fund this project. The current tax abatement at South Block, and I see Kristen popped on here, but I know that their tax abatement expires, I think, in 2028, if I'm remembering that correctly. So after that point, we'll be collecting quite a bit more increment for the area, and we'll be able to fund it. So I don't know if it'll take quite the whole 10 years, and it'll be within that 10-year period.
Kristen, did you want to add anything to that?
So we are also collecting between $450,000 a year to $500,000 a year while that MUTIP abatement is in place. So we will have revenue coming in to provide match funds before the abatement expires. So I don't see it being at the outer end of the 10 years, but closer to the halfway point.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilor Nordike.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next slide, please. So can you speak a little bit more about the sidewalk infill for pedestrian connectivity? I don't see dollar signs attached to any of these items. I know they're in the materials, but it would be helpful if you could walk me through a little bit what you mean by basically constructing missing sidewalks without determining the locations today, or even by the November bond measure. You know, I worry that voters might be concerned about not having a sense for what we're going to use the money for going into the bond measure. So can you help me fill in some gaps?
Sure, I appreciate the question. So just to fill in the numbers, the safer pedestrian crossings, we're looking at 7.5 million, the sidewalk infill, 7.5 million, and then the sidewalk replacement is 10 million. So just to fill in those numbers. And I believe we utilize this kind of bucket system for the last streets and bridges bond. And I'm going to see if Peter can speak to that here in a minute. But we're looking at a pretty long horizon, so a 10-year period, and the priorities could change within that 10 years. So looking at this bucket system will allow council to put those exactly where they're needed at that point when the funds are available. A little bit on timing, we're not looking at issuing all 300 million right at the beginning. We don't have the capacity to maintain that tax levy rate at that level. So we'll be issuing it throughout the bond. So all the projects that you see will be spread out throughout that 10-year period.
Yeah, Mayor, so if I may, we obviously know where sidewalks are missing. So it would just be a matter of prioritizing that list and actually using, you know, what we've typically done with these kinds of things is we'll use a subcommittee of the council to help us do this, and then the entirety of the council would approve the ultimate list. For sidewalk replacement, that would be a kind of an adjunct to the $2 million we spend every year in sidewalk replacement. Our thinking is that if this passed, we would look to do collectors and arterials sidewalk replacement and let our staff do the local streets, because single family homes take more of the kid glove aspect that we take on for customer service, where in an arterial we could probably contract that out and get a lot more done, you know, just do more production runs. But that's the idea between the infill and the replacement.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Anyone else right now? Okay, Josh, you keep going?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This next category is pavement repair and rehabilitation to fix up the existing roadways. Includes curb ramps to meet ADA requirements.
Okay.
Urban.
Sorry. That's okay. Go ahead.
Urban upgrades to existing roads. So this includes new curbs, sidewalks, multi-use paths or bike lanes, stormwater treatment, and streetlights with pedestrian crossings at these three roads: McGilchrist, Fisher Road, and Pringle Road.
As you look at these, how does this kind of fit into the bicycle proposal we heard so much about tonight? I mean, does this fit in with that, Peter? Is this get us started down that road, or what's going on here?
All of these projects would include new bike lanes. So as you know, none of these streets have curbs, sidewalks, bike lanes. These are all you know, small 2-lane facilities. So they would become, I think in every case here, well, McGilchrist gets, yes, well, from 12th to 22nd, McGilchrist will be a 3-lane facility. So then from 22nd to 25th, it's a wider facility. But in essence, all three of these go from 2-lane roads to 3-lane roads. So one 11-foot lane in each direction, a 12-foot 2-way turn lane, 6-foot bike lanes, curbs, and sidewalks. McGilchrist, because there's more of an opportunity there with the right-of-way that we have, we'll have bike lanes. It'll be a wider sidewalk to buffer the lanes. On Fisher and Pringle, we'll have to acquire the right of way that'll be tighter. So what we're looking at this point is the standard 3-lane facility. But yes, they will all come with sidewalks and with bike lanes and with street trees and with street lights.
That's great. That sounds, do they operate in isolation, or do they connect up to other parts of the transportation system?
Well, what we like to do is, we follow our transportation system plan, and there's a bike and ped element. So we like to make the connections. Everything that we do in town at this level has bike and ped facilities. So we're trying to make connectivity to everything. Will there still be missing gaps? Yeah, it's a financial.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, particularly about McGilchrist and access to McGilchrist by bicycle or other alternatives. What's that look like if I'm coming out of, say, the Inglewood neighborhood? How does that all connect up?
Well, at McGilchrist, there are bike lanes on 12th Street. And 13th, so they would connect there. There are no lanes on 25th, right. So if you were biking across town and onto 25th, then that's a missing link.
Okay, but you could make it off of 12th. Could you do it off? Yeah, could you connect off 17th and get around onto 22nd?
Well, 17th stops at Mission.
Okay.
So you have to go over to 22nd, which does not have bike lanes. But you could connect down to, you could take 22nd down to Madrona, and Madrona has bike lanes.
Okay. So there are
gaps throughout.
Okay. Well, the reason I'm asking is that is a substantial service area out there on McGilchrist for a lot of citizens. And I just wondered how that would kind of look as if you wanted to map out your trip, would you be able to map it out on bicycle and get there, pretty well on bike lanes when this gets done?
Yeah. Depending on where you're coming from and where you're going, there would be missing pieces. There are local streets. Obviously, you could come down 23rd. Yeah. So if you came up Madrona, you'd have bike lanes on Madrona, and then you'd come up 22nd, which doesn't have bike lanes, but doesn't have a whole lot of traffic either from the south. So there's some opportunities for being in a not so busy street with other areas where you just, like on 22nd between Mission and McGilchrist, that's a tougher ride for a bicycle. Okay. But 23rd is available.
Okay. Councilor Stapleton.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a great conversation. This sounds a lot like the conversation that Dylan and Ian and I had trying to figure out, what we were frustrated about with the system and how we can make it better. And I think that this conversation is what so many people who want a bike have, right? Because, well, how am I going to get there? And trying to map it out and figure out, where are bike lanes and where are areas that I feel safe riding. And I think the biggest difference between the system that we have right now in place and maybe some of the bike lanes that are in the project is that what I'm hoping for is protected bike lanes. And that's a whole nother thing, right? It's not just a white strip of paint on the ground separating you from fast moving cars. There's extra space. There's hopefully even vertical divides. And so, that's the biggest difference that I see in the projects that are in the proposed bond versus what I'm hoping for in the future. And that really critical piece of being connected, because you can't, I can't ride with my 10-year-old and then be dumped out onto a busy street and expected to ride with traffic. And if we don't connect it, then folks aren't going to get on those bikes. And if we have a climate goal to reach, really in 13 years from now, a 50% reduction in emissions, we have to provide choices for people where they can be out there riding their bike instead of driving. So that's, to me, the biggest difference in the proposed bond versus what I'm hoping for in the future.
But we are getting in the proposed bond, if I understood, protected bike lanes. Are we or aren't we getting those? Did I misunderstand?
I think the terminology, Mayor, is we are getting bike lanes. In our current standards, these facilities will not have buffered bike lanes, which is
okay.
What, for example, on High Street and Church Street.
What about Fisher Road? Will it have a curb or something protecting it?
Well, not to our current standard. Now, it doesn't mean that we couldn't, design that road to have buffered bike lanes. But when you're talking about buffered bike lane, you're talking about an extra, it depends how big you want the buffer to be, 2 feet, 3 feet, 5 feet. That means that's additional right-of-way that you have to acquire in a very tight situation. So can it be done? Of course it can be done. As all engineers like to say, it's just a matter of money.
Okay. Well, that's always the problem, isn't it? Okay. Councilor Phillips?
Yeah, just to reiterate this point, this discussion is helpful. I think I understand McGilchrist, that the bike lanes there have been designed to be buffered, and that on the Pringle Road, which is on this list, it does have bike lanes and sidewalks, which it doesn't currently have, but they wouldn't necessarily be buffered. Is that a correct understanding?
Right, Councilor. What we have cost estimated everything at is to our current standard or adopted standard, which has a 6-foot bike lane, which would match, in the case of Pringle, would match what is there south of Madrona, but not a buffered bike lane.
Just a follow-up question regarding Pringle, which is now in most of that project would be in Ward 3. Is there space? Like, I know you said it's space constrained. Like, how difficult would it be to get right away? Obviously money is the main constraint, but isn't space also a constraint there?
Well, at some point, if you over widen, then we're also taking houses, not just portions of the front yard. So
that's what I meant by space. So
yeah,
it's constrained.
Right. So Fisher, for example, is a very tight little deal. So it really just depends on Pringle, for example. The east side is more, once you get kind of north of Georgia, it's more industrial, commercial. So there may be more room on the east side than on the west side. So these things can be done. It's just what are they going to cost and whether we have enough money or not.
Okay.
Okay. Councilor Barney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is for Director Fernandez. Since, I really like the idea of protected or buffered bike lanes, but since it requires the purchase of additional right-of-way, doesn't the purchase of additional right-of-way, can't you use SDCs for that?
The answer is yes. If these facilities are in the 309 list, the SDC eligible list, then SDC funds can be brought in. It's just a matter of whether we have enough SDC funds or not to match.
Okay, and that SDC list, the 309 list, gets updated what, every year?
That list can actually be updated at any time. Okay. We just need to make sure that the roads that we are updating them to will actually have traffic from new development, and that's based on the modeling and how much of the traffic. So there's a certain percentage that we're limited to based on the modeling, what it says that traffic from new development is using it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Fernandez, what's the process for changing the standard? You referenced that you built the standard, which makes sense. So what do we do to change the standard?
Yeah, so that is adopted in our transportation system plan. There's if you turn to the street system element, there's a graphic there that shows what the dimensions and the cross sections are for local streets, collectors, minor arterials, et cetera.
So in our upcoming process, we will be reviewing all of those standards, right? Is that as a follow-up to our Salem, and we would have an opportunity at that point to have a full dive into what our standard is and what we want it to look like going forward. Is that correct?
That can all be looked at, yes.
Thank you.
Any other? Okay, Josh?
Thank you. This next slide is for Marine Drive Northwest. We've already talked about it some this evening, but we're prepared to talk through it if anyone has any questions.
Councilor Varney?
Thank you. I just have more of a comment. When this first started on the steering committee, it was going to be a $47 million project. And so we proposed, instead of it going all the way to Riverbend, having it go to Harrod, which would still accomplish what we wanted. Plus it would add on the bike and pedestrian connector to the Union Street Bridge or to the park. And so we were able to reduce it by 24 million and still get what we needed.
Do you want to, Councilor Varney, do you want to kind of go over that connector, that bicycle pedestrian? Where, can you go over where that is on the map? Just, I think that'd be of interest to people, that it's more than turning off on 5th or whatever the driver's issues are. The walker bicycle issues are more complicated, it sounds like.
Yeah, I don't have Mr. Anderson's map just to pull up in front of me.
I was looking at this one.
Oh, on here. Because it runs, it connects over and runs kind of alongside the park, and it's just for the pedestrians and bikes. So it's a safe way for folks to get from Harrod. I mean, not just the connector, but overall, this whole Marine Drive project is a much safer way for pedestrians and bikes to do that north-south route instead of having to take Wallace. And then the connector that we're talking about is from Cameo and 5th, I believe, and then it kind of angles over toward the park.
So if I were looking at it from where I live in Northeast, and I want to come down Union Street, get on the bridge, I don't have to try to get across it at the old Second Street. I can actually go up along the park. I can turn right, kind of go up and get across further up. I mean, does it create that kind of a continuing?
That's my understanding, yes.
And then I'll have a light to get across, and okay, or something better than 2nd Street, which is just a race. Okay.
True.
Okay, good. Councilor Hoy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also wanted to just underscore what Councilor Varney said and also what Mr. Anderson said, but I wanted to add to it and remind colleagues that this portion of Marine Drive was something that the Congestion Relief Task Force recommended back in 2017, maybe it's 2018. So this is something, putting this project in is sort of following through with a commitment from a task force a number of years ago that we committed to. So just wanted to remind folks about that.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I echo Councilor Varney's and Hoy's comments, and I point out that this has been going on for a long, long time, and this tonight is the first time I heard about the bike ped path connecting, and that's just perfect. That one of the original designs had the driveway, the park. The Marine Drive going through there and around the park, and I think there was a lot of concern about that. So this is an excellent result, I think, and I'm really happy to look at this design and to see what it'll do. It will really relieve congestion and be for local traffic as opposed to traffic going up and down, local traffic going up and down Wallace Road. So I think this is great.
Yeah, I think this is will be a really good addition for the whole community. I mean, I think this is a really good change in terms of the way that entire 26 miles of separated bike path that we've already got in place through the parks can connect up. I think it's a really positive event. Councilor Stapleton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to give kudos to staff. This is one of the projects that I am really excited about. this one along with McGilcrest, where we have those separated bike lanes like this, is just, this is the gold standard as far as bike infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure. So really couldn't be more pleased with this project and excited to see that connection made from the project to the park, which really opens up all the way down Union Street and all downtown. And so just really great work here and excited to see it come to fruition.
Okay, anyone else? Hey, Josh, what else you got?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This next category is for bridge rehabilitations, to strengthen existing bridge to remove load restriction at these 4 bridges.
What are those load restrictions like? What are they impeding? Are they impeding economic growth? Or what's going on these?
Yeah, so Mayor, a load restriction is placed by ODOT after they inspect the bridges. They inspect the bridges periodically.
Okay.
And you get to the point where the bridge really needs repair. So right, a load restriction means that there's no trucking the bridge, after, and I'm not going to say it's 1 or 2 years, but over years, then at some point the bridge is no longer viable. So we really only have bond money to make these kinds of repairs.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, it impedes all trucking.
And these already have the load restrictions in place.
These are already load restricted.
So I can't get from Market to over Mill Creek on 17th now, with a heavy load.
Trucking has to go around.
And the Mission Street Bridge over Pringle Creek. Remind me what that one, where's that one?
It's over by the hospital.
Ah, yeah. Okay. Ambulances get over it, right? I just want to. What can't go over this right now?
I think Peter lost a connection for a second, but
okay,
it's really,
yeah,
that's okay.
I'm back. I apologize.
I'm not sure it's worth an answer, but it just kind of caught my attention. It's over by the hospital, really.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the bridge that's over by the entrance to emergency there.
Ah, okay.
Right. So most trucking is just going up and over the 12th Street bypass and onto Bellevue.
Okay. Great. Councilor Nordike.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have to admit, when I look at the wish list of items before us as a draft, these aren't exactly the highest priority for me out of all the items that I'm seeing on our list. And there's so many great items to choose from. And if cost were no object, that would be a different matter entirely. But I am trying to give a critical eye to all of the projects here. And as I see this, this would help truckers get around certain parts of the city. I have not heard concerns from any of the testimony that we received indicating that this is an urgent need. And we have a lot of projects before us to consider. So I think it would help me understand a little bit when we talk about removing load restrictions. What is the load restriction in question? What kinds of trucks are not permitted to access these areas? And frankly, and this is a larger question, what percentage of traffic is impacted by this load restriction? And the reason I ask that is that how much does it increase traffic by not having an ability for trucks restricted by load to be able to access these 4 bridges? I know those are a lot of questions and maybe they can't all be answered in rapid fire, but I do know this is our work session. I don't expect a final answer at this time either.
Yeah, Councilor, we'd have to get you the specifics on each bridge.
Sure.
I think what's important to recognize is once a bridge is load restricted, it's really coming to the end of its life. So really beyond the economic issues of being able to traverse our transportation system, and remember that more and more our economy, bringing food to grocery stores, bringing the stuff that, that really everything is trucked in these days. So not only does it affect our local economy, but it really, it means that these bridges over time continue to deteriorate. And if we don't address them in a timely manner, then at some point, things might get even more serious, like we might have to close the bridge. And you see these locations, these are all on arterials. So these are important connections to our transportation system that might lead to bigger issues. So we'll get you the details on what the load restriction is and what it means for the size of truck and those kinds of things. But I think we should be thinking, much more broadly that if we don't fix them now, we can be, and we're out then 10, 20 years, we could be in more serious problems.
I saw Chief Niblock step up here.
Good evening, everyone. That's a great question. Just for some context, for us, these restrictions means that our ladder trucks and our water tenders cannot cross them. So they have to find an alternate route to respond to fires when they're on these bridges. They don't use them. So until they're repaired, they're basically an arterial that we can't respond on. So it does have an impact to more than just service delivery trucks. It's all heavy trucks, which includes our ladder trucks and our water tenders. So there are some impacts to the city operations as well.
Thank you, Chief. I wondered about that. And Peter, do you have trucks during inclement weather that also need to cross these bridges, or what happens with your trucks on these?
I am not aware that it limits us, but
okay.
I have to confirm that, Mayor.
Okay, well, I think it'd be helpful. One thing, as you put this together, if you would, I think showing us the context of these bridges so we can understand, particularly when we get an alert that there is a potential limitation on fire services, I think it's helpful to understand the context of what the decision could portend if we don't. If we didn't include it, or if we do include it, either way, I think it'd be helpful. Councilor Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor Bennett. This is kind of a comment mixed with a question. In my 14 years here, working at the Salem Hospital Emergency Department, a few years back, the bridge where Winter Street goes over Pringle Creek had some water damage, and it had to be, shut off or closed it. And that's a significant impact to getting to and from the hospital. So, hearing that we have a rate limit where Mission Street goes over Pringle is very concerning to me. I'm sure we would find a way to cope, but that is not optimal. I don't know if my comment is off base. So my question is, am I summarizing this okay, or am I overstating the potential concern?
No, you're right on, Councilor. In fact, here's the weird story of that bridge at Winter and at Shelton Ditch is what it is. So that bridge was impacted by the flooding, and because it already needed to be repaired, it was impacted by the flooding, and we were fortunate in a weird way that the flooding caused it, so FEMA paid for the repairs. So we got a brand new bridge because we were fortunate enough to have a flood. So yeah, and then we got a great bridge, and we were able to take the piers out of the water, and that bridge will last a very, very long time. But that's unfortunately where, if we don't have bridges in our bond issues, then we're really waiting either for a disaster, or we're waiting for the bridge to then get bad enough that we qualify for ODOT to fund, the one bridge that we might get every so often. So it's really not a good way to do business.
Okay.
Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I'm not, the bridge we were talking about is in my ward, and if I'm not mistaken, that was a Condi McCullough Bridge too. So there was some historical import in that. I have a question for Chief Niblock, and then two other questions. Chief, are you saying that right now your water trucks and your hook and ladder trucks cannot use these bridges, or are you saying in the future they may not be able to use the bridges?
Once the load restrictions are placed on them right now, we have not been using these bridges with our ladder trucks and our water tenders since the load restrictions have been placed, and we will not use them until they're safe to traverse for that weight of a vehicle.
And do you have any estimate or comment on how this is, if this has detrimentally affected your ability to get someplace at the right time?
So there is a slight impact on our ability, as you can imagine. If it really depends on where the fire is at, but if it's on the other side of the bridge and you have to go around to get there, that does delay your response a bit. Remember that our fire engines can still drive across these bridges. Ambulances can drive across them. So the main core of the response going to a structure fire, for instance, would be fire engines getting there first, and ladder trucks would be coming, a second or third resource coming in. So there would still be resources on scene in about the same amount of time. It's just that we just can't use these streets. So just depends on where the call is. There is a slight delay for the ladder truck to get there, and what are the impacts that 7 seconds, 10 seconds, depends on the location.
So just so I understand, the slight delay is with the secondary stuff that is coming in, not with the primary stuff.
That's correct.
Okay, then these are, they're not questions for you, Chief, and thank you for those answers.
Thank you.
I think that, and maybe I'm wrong, Director Fernandez, but is Liberty Street and Mission, are those state highways? And is there some ODOT responsibility for this as well?
These are not state highways.
Okay.
State highway designation ends at 12th Street for Mission.
Oh, okay, great, thanks. And Liberty is not one of the old 99s in there? Okay.
That was all, 99 went away many, many moons ago. So
all right.
None of these are state highways.
Okay. So my other question then is, I'd also be interested in the cost of this, because we're looking at the $300 million, and it'd be a good idea to know how much each one of these cost. And I don't know if you can do this, and maybe it's not appropriate, but if you do deem it appropriate, some sort of ranking. In other words, one bridge is in the worst shape, rank them 1 to 4, and along with the cost, along with the other. Somebody asked for some other information. I can't remember now what it was, but you were going to get back to us with that.
So these, and I can answer that question right now, Counselor. Okay. They're between $500,000 to 2 of them are a little over, just under 2 million. 1 is $1 million, and 2 are just 3 are just under $1 million.
Okay, thank you.
580,000, 1,800,000, 900,000, 1.8, 1.7. So they're not a huge amount of money for with respect to the $175 million, but I there's other projects that I mean, it's obviously the council's decision. I really gotta whatever influence I have. This is really it. This and the asphalt are really important parts of the bond. We really don't have any other funding.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and that's what we want to hear. That's what we want to hear from you, how you internally prioritize things as well.
Yeah, okay, that's why they're here. They're really important to us.
Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you so much. I actually asked some of these same questions when we were in the subcommittee, and there was an email, and Peter, I'm hoping that you can help me with this, that was sent to us with the delay of each of the bridges being out for our fire trucks. And I think the chief was right. I think it was 8 seconds or 10 seconds on different bridges. And their final response was the one that was important to them was the one by the hospital, just in case they needed to use it. Could we find that information and send it to the whole of council? Would that be possible?
I'm sure if there was an email sent, we can find it.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Councilor Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is for Director Fernandez as well. So I believe there's 6 bridge projects listed in our supplemental documents. And I just want to make sure, are all 6 of these bridges rate limited, or weight limited, or is it just 4 of the bridges? The bridge at Liberty Street and Pringle Creek, and then Church Street and Pringle Creek, I don't see them mentioning shoring up the members. It seems to be more of addressing the dilapidated railings.
Yeah,
So,
you're correct, Counselor. I was looking at my very big form here, and the 4 of them. You're correct. The 4 that are listed here are
weight limited.
1,800,000 and 900,000, and then the other 2 bridge rehab projects have other issues. They're not weight limit issues. So you're correct. I appreciate you you helping me clarify that.
Yeah, no worries. And then just kind of help me and the general public understand. Like, I think I'm starting to understand the broad strokes of the weight limiting or rate limiting. But with these dilapidated concrete railings, what's the consequence of that? Are they going to fall over? What's the risk?
Yeah, so if you walk on, Councilor Anderson talked about the Cundy McCullough Bridge on Church, around the corner from one of these bridges at Church near Safe. If you walk on there and you look at the railings, they're really, the concrete's just starting to fall off of it. The Liberty Street Bridge is the same thing over in downtown, just by City Hall. So are they going to fall over? No, they're not going to fall over. Do they look terrible? Are they continuing to deteriorate and getting worse? Yeah, so they'll just experience many, many more years of deterioration if they're not, if we don't repair them.
Is there a safety factor there if one of us is leaving here late at night and suddenly loses control of our car? Are we going to find ourselves in Mirror Pond or what?
Yeah, probably not, Mayor.
Okay.
You'd have to be
safe
flying.
But so I'm just wondering if there's any safety factors associated.
Over time,
I understand the cosmetics, but
no, I don't really think there is at this point.
Okay.
A significant safety. I don't think the rail is going to fall over.
Okay.
In the next 10 years, but it will continue to deteriorate, and all you have to do is go out there and take a look and see how bad it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Josh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This next category is replacing playground equipment at these 10 parks.
Okay. Who's against the kids? Oh, come on. Are these okay? I'll start. Is this playground equipment that where's Peter? Is this playground equipment that's dilapidated or missing or unsafe? Is it monkey bars? What is going on here that this many parks need what sound like fairly substantial playground equipment replacement?
Yeah, let me see if I don't recall the details. I know Brian Martin's on the call, and he spent a lot of time with these things. Brian, do you want to come on and talk about the playground equipment?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Brian Martin, city engineer. They are all in different states of need. So as this equipment ages and new safety factors come out, there's different things that may not look imminent as a safety hazard, but they really should be replaced because both based on age and the safety issues. And sometimes it can be with the fall area, the equipment itself. And so our park staff looked at, things need to be done with these. And we tried to estimate an average cost for each one. And of course, we would go in and we would not only replace the equipment, but anything else that needed to be replaced around them.
Councilor Stapleton.
Thanks. Sorry, unexpected there. My question is about Riverfront Park, and I think this is in my ward. It might actually now be in Tom's. So sorry, Tom, for speaking about your ward. But I guess my question is to staff. You know, I'm leaning into trustee here because you know what you're doing and you're out there seeing it. I just don't I don't understand the need for a repair yet on this, and knowing that there's so many parks around the city that do have really old equipment that could be replaced maybe before this one. So any kind of help understanding why that one is in particular is on the list would be helpful for me. And also this park also has access to other funding options that other parks don't have. So I'd love to know staff's thoughts on that and help me get there, please.
I don't have the details, Councilor Stapleton, on the issues with each park. I know our park staff looked at all of them. They've got a list. And in addition to these 10, we had a second list of additional parks that needed them. And so I'm just relying on them. And I can't say that this is the exact order that they would be replaced in, but we could certainly get a little bit more information for you and provide it to the committee if needed.
Great, thank you so much. That'd be really helpful for me.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Oh, I'm sorry. Jackie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question actually was the same as Councilor Stapleton in terms of how did you prioritize? It was these specific parks, and getting a little bit more better idea in terms of what kind of equipment that you're planning on placing at each of these parks. Is it going to be like certain standardized, like everyone's going to get the same, or is it only going to be like this park because it's smaller might only get this item, but then this park because it's larger is going to get a lot more?
Yeah, again, we'd have to provide more information. We did not go into the detail of the specific park equipment that each park would get. It was really based on the safety data that our parks folks had, and knowing that at some point they would have to be replaced in the next 10 years. So it's a generic list based on the worst. I shouldn't say.
I think this one I think is actually very important. We'll have issues over some of the bigger ones, but this is where a whole bunch of people live their parks and know their local park and what it needs. And we'll need, I think, a very good explanation of what's going on in these parks. I think we'll hear from a lot of people about playground equipment, and I think we ought to pay close attention. We haven't heard it yet, but it's coming, I'm sure, if we get it wrong. So I think we need to be very cautious here as we work our way through it. This is just the kind of thing where people live, and we don't want to get this wrong. Councilor Phillips?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm trying to understand the document that's attached to tonight's meeting, the steering committee recommended project list when it comes to the parks. I see the summary at the end, and I think I understand it, but I want to verify that I'm doing this right. That, if you look allocation by ward, I think Ward 3 has $0 listed towards it, but there's $13 million listed for the entire city. And then there's another place where dog parks are called out as a spending item. And, I'm moving from the severity of making sure we have a bridge by the hospital to advocating for a dog park in Ward 3, but I did campaign on a dog park in Ward 3. And I know that we've wanted one in the new Fairview Park, or what will be the new Fairview Park. And I see it on the list above where it says dog parks, and it's for Greer and Fairview. So I just want to make sure that, even though the summary says there's no funding for Ward 3, there is in fact overlap with some of the other buckets that include things like, improvements for, I see Morningside Park, and then, the dog parks that include Fairview. So I guess what I'm saying is, even though it says 0, that's 0 specific projects, whereas we will benefit from the citywide things that I've mentioned. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, I believe so, Counselor. The citywide will include this playground category. There's also a paths and trail category for system-wide park paths and trails, that falls into that category. So some of these you just had to identify a ward. Others, just says citywide benefit. And for some of our regional areas that draw people from all wards, there's some benefit there also.
Okay, thank you.
I think to underscore what Councilor Phillips is saying, that kind of detail is going to be very important in trying to pass a bond measure, because I think we're going to have to explain, and we don't want to be explaining, we want to have it fairly evident that there is a real care in distribution of funds citywide. I think that becomes not just calling it citywide. I mean, at some point we're going to have to call it out. If all Phillips is getting in parks is a dog park, we need to at least highlight it, and I'm sure that's true for other counselors as well. So I just suggest that we be very cognizant of the importance in each of the wards for these kinds of services. People watch this and I think care a lot about it. Councilor Varney?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick comment. I wanted to mention one of the things that came up when I was on Salem Parks and Rec Advisory Board. I was going to say SPRAB, and I thought acronyms. Okay. I just wanted to mention that there was public comment regarding when pieces of equipment were removed for safety reasons or whatever, and it hasn't been replaced. And I think that's really, really a crucial area. Not that I want to prioritize any of these projects, because I do believe, because of safety, et cetera, we need to replace playground equipment. But I think the ones that are missing equipment that once existed really should be looked at.
Councilor Nordike.
Thank you. A couple of quick things. First of all, I wanted to point out the fact that when it comes to looking at, and Mr. Mayor and Councilor Phillips, you pointed out the fact that Ward 3 does not receive any, it does not appear to receive any percentage of the funding when it's under the parks category, nor does Ward 4 for that matter. So I can understand as a counselor for those areas, whether you're from those areas or not, you care about whether funding is equitably distributed. And you care about whether each ward is getting some benefit from the bond measure. And the total parks projection, if you look at all the parks projects added up, it's about 28.4 million out of the 300. If you go back to the section for sidewalks and bridges and bike improvements, that's a much larger chunk of our $300 million pie. It's a little bit over half of the pie. It's 157 million and some change. And Ward 7 receives $0 under that percentage. So I don't mean to call out bridges because I despise bridges. We all love and know and use them. But another thing that kind of puzzles me about this process is when I look at the scoring, you know, I wanted to know more about the bridges specifically because they did not receive very high scores. For example, the strengthening of the bridge from 15th to Mill Creek received a score of 40 points. Another one of the bridge strengthening projects received a score of 42 points. If you look at some of the park projects, they received a much higher score. There's a bathroom project in one of the facilities, Cascade Gateway Park replacement 4-stall bathroom, that received a score of 80 points. So I'm a little confused to hear that when city staff says, well, this is our priority. If I had to prioritize something, it would be improving our bridges. I can understand that, but the score doesn't show that. So perhaps I need to know a little bit more about the methodology. Maybe it doesn't make sense to score bridges the way that you would score the necessity of a park bathroom. So maybe someone can take me back a step and explain, how was this scoring done? Did only city staff conduct the score? Did the infrastructure committee conduct the score? Did you have separate scoring for bridges as opposed to parks? I'm just trying to understand that because I've participated in city projects. I used to chair the Social Services Advisory Board, and we let the scoring really guide how we had to divide up a very small pie amongst all of these incredible nonprofits who all came to us every year. So we tried to let the scoring play a pretty important role. So that's a whole lot of commentary, but I did have some questions embedded in there. But I want to start that off with, how did we get to these scores that we see on our screen in the 8-page report?
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
There are two different scales, Councilor. That you make an excellent point, and we probably should have said that at the beginning. The scale for parks is one scale, and the scale for transportation is a different scale. So they're consistent within each category, but they cannot be compared, because if not, then you get exactly what you're describing, and you're right to ask the question. Now, Brian can get into the scoring details, or we can provide that to you later. But to put your mind at ease, they are two different scales. So when you think of it in two different scales, then you see that the bridges actually rank quite highly in the transportation system, and then you got to look at the parks separately.
That is helpful, because then it makes more sense. So once you actually look at the bridge category and other areas who fall under that category, you don't see anything scored as highly as 80. Nothing appears to dip over 50.
Yeah, McGilchrist. Yeah, McGilchrist is the only one that scores a little over 60, and then the bridges score very highly after that.
Okay, that is helpful, because I'm trying to prioritize. We have so many different needs across the city. I'm trying to understand where we spend our limited dollars. It's helpful to understand the scoring process better. Thank you.
Thank you.
One other, when was our last parks bond?
This one would be the first one.
That's what I thought. And I think we need to kind of remember that the parks have not had a shot at bonding before, as far as I know. And it's one of, I don't know if you all hear from, but I hear quite a bit from, or have they, Josh?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. 1992 was the last parks bond.
And it failed, or did it go?
It failed.
Yeah. I have heard a lot from the Parks Foundation. Mickey may have heard more as a member of the Parks Board, but I hear quite a bit about the parks, and I hear it very passionately. And I'm kind of concerned. We haven't heard from them in public testimony yet in this area, whether for the committee or for this work session. Is that one? It's one that makes me. I feel like it's one we ought to be featuring more than we are, or at least attracting more attention. We're hearing a lot more about a lot of stuff that is interesting, but this parks thing is I think it's going to be a pretty big deal in the bond measure. So there's my political advice for the day. I'll stay out of it otherwise. There's just not a lot of folks going to care about this. What do you find, Mickey? You've dealt with this.
This has come up a number of times at SPRAB, the need, especially as we continue to grow. We have parks that are being developed, and the problem is we don't have funding to take care of all of our parks. I mean, there's a lot of stuff behind it, and people love our parks. I mean, we have almost 3,000 acres of parks right now, and it's truly a gem of Salem. And so, yeah, we've talked about it at the board meetings. We did quite often that as we continue to grow, we may have to look at something down the road.
Well, I just suggest we keep in mind this is the first shot they've had, as far as I know, as ever. And I think we ought to, as we talk about who's going to attract votes and get people excited and all that, this is going to be a factor. This has a real live and regular voting constituency we ought to pay attention to. So I think this one's real important to kind of to explore and to make sure we've got the right package there put out. So as a political, my staff has I always count on them, but almost completely. But this one might be one where we make sure, particularly as you look at distribution of funds around the city, that everybody's getting a share. I think is just essential in this, and that we're looking at the kinds of issues we've probably all heard about at neighborhood groups or some other group we've been in. So, okay, Josh, go ahead.
Still with parks, we have restroom facilities at McKay, Bush Pasture Park, Cascade Gateway Park, Wallace Marine Park, and Northgate Park. And Northgate was one that was added after steering committee discussion, if you all remember that.
Yes. They want speed bumps, but trust me, this one will come in real handy along the way. Okay. What else you got, Josh?
Athletic courts, sports fields. New tennis pickleball courts at Highland, Hoover, and River Road Parks, and replace multi-use athletic courts at Hoover, Morningside, and Sumter Parks. And then sports fields at Gear, McKay, and Orchard Heights Park. And if you want the detail, it's really in that spreadsheet. You can see the exact sports fields that are being replaced. It won't fit on the slide.
Very good.
For the next one, covered areas and paved parking lots. So covered areas or shelters at Bush Pasture Park, Gear Park, Orchard Heights Park, McKay School Park, and then paved parking lots at Minto Brown Island Park for parking lot 2 and 3.
Yes, Virginia, I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, it's okay. Just a quick question. I think this is for Peter. To the conversation about, different areas like Ward 3 or 4 with the parks. When I also look through the CIP, I hold up the bond, but then I also hold up the CIP, which is, the 5-year plan that we currently have and funded, and all the good, all the good stuff is in that. We see a lot of park development in those areas. Can you speak to a little bit how these two separate things kind of actually are one, or hopefully if this passes, kind of become one big thing? And then how that looks as far as being spread out equally across the city?
I'm sorry, Counselor, I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
Yeah, sorry about that. So right now with the CIP, there's a lot of park projects and even street projects and all kinds of stuff that are going on across the city. If the bond gets approved, then all of these projects that are in the bond will be added to the CIP. So it becomes even a bigger package. But that also spreads out or gives more of an equal look as far as, I guess what I'm saying is you can't really look at the bond alone. You also have to look at the 5-year CIP, because those are funded projects that are also happening. And if this is approved, it will just add to the current CIP. Am I explaining that better now?
Yes, okay. You are correct. Once the CIP is a financial planning document. So if the bond passes, these projects are funded. Some of them would be funded outside of the 5-year window, but they would all be funded. So right now the universe of where projects are throughout the city would be bigger. You're correct.
Thank you.
Remember, you got to explain that in about 5 seconds. It's an interest, because we all take a while just grasping the CIP and how it all fits together. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was just where the covered area is in Bush's Pasture Park, but in light of how much that would be costing over a $3 million bond, I'm not really concerned about that. If the Parks Department thinks there's a need for that, that's fine. Maybe we'll save $50,000 by not putting it there, but that's crazy. I go along with the staff if they think it's needed to be there.
Okay. Anything else? Josh, you want to move us along?
I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is kind of, again, another follow-up in terms of how did you decide upon these 4 parks in general that had to have a covered area?
I don't know the answer to that, Counselor. I wasn't involved in that. Do you know, Brian?
I don't, Peter. I think Rob Romanek, who's our parks planner, he looked at the overall distribution of where these types of facilities are in the city and chose these parks based on where he felt the need was greatest.
Yeah, so they would be consistent with the adopted parks master plans, for each park. And these are the bigger parks. So these are parks that have reservable areas, so they're intended for that. the nitty gritty of how they were selected, we'd have to bring that back to you.
Okay, so in other words, this is just money that we're going to be setting aside to eventually put in a covered area in these 4 parks.
Correct. Correct. And then they would be usable when, like any other covered area, if nobody's using it, you can hang out in it. But people would have the ability to reserve them and then use them for, gatherings.
Will those reserved spots also have like benches and like kind of like the green table that we're seeing in the picture for Minto Brown Island Park?
Yeah, so typically the way we do those is we just move in picnic tables. So when somebody reserves something, we usually set it up for them, so they don't have to be moving stuff in. So they'll tell us what they need, and we get it ready for them for their event.
Thank you.
Okay. Any others? Okay, let's. As I recall, Peter, there was some discussion of paved parking lots at Minto Brown Island somewhere in the past several weeks. Do you recall that discussion at all?
Yeah, folks, users of the dog park were concerned about the condition of the gravel lot. It just rained like crazy this year, so I think we finally were able to get to it. So these are, in fact, this one would actually just pave that dog park, so we wouldn't have to just keep replacing the gravel.
Councilor Barney.
Thank you, Mayor. I also wanted to say when the steering committee was discussing this, we actually had, I believe, 4 different paving projects at parks, and we decided to remove the projects at Orchard Heights and Wallace Marine and Cascades Gateway because we knew folks really wanted to have the Minto Brown one paved. I just wanted to add that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Josh.
The next area is fire engines and equipment. So it's replacing Salem's 15-year-old fire engines. The last time they were purchased with bond funds in 2006. Replaces ladder trucks, rescue tools, jaws of life, defibrillators, medic units, and other equipment.
Okay. Anyone? Okay, great.
This next category was something that developed during the steering committee discussion. Sites for future development, branch libraries, and affordable housing. And you heard a little bit about it through testimony. But the idea would be to acquire 2 sites, and then for one of the sites to pay for pre-development, and basically you'd end up with a shell for the library. So it'd be a public-private partnership. And that shell for the library could be used for something else until the city identifies operating funding to fund that branch library. So those could coincide, but there could be a time delay there.
Okay. Anyone?
I have a few questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So
Chris, would you take over for a second? Thanks.
So my question is, so this is funding to be able to purchase property, has nothing to do with staffing it or maintaining it.
That is correct. So when we're talking about general obligation bonds, we're only talking about capital purchases, capital construction, no operating costs.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this one? Okay, Josh.
This next one, also through discussion with the committee, it's an affordable housing opportunity fund. So a bucket of $10 million available for gap funding to public or private developers. It could be $1 to $2 million or $2 to $3 million per project to really fill those last little pieces of funding as costs escalate to get those projects finished. And then targeting that affordable housing. I will mention just kind of on the technical side, we'd issue these as non-exempt bonds just to be able to supply them to private developers. And then for the life of the bond, so when you issue a bond, it has an expiration date, say 30 years in the future. For the life of the bond, the city would be responsible for maintaining that affordable housing. we'd be responsible for auditing and making sure it maintains that affordable housing status.
Any questions on this one? Councilor Phillips.
Yeah, I just want to verify. Thank you, Josh, for your comments there on the affordable housing. But I think you've explained to me once, and I may need the process re-explained, that while this bond is for like a 10-year period, some of these go over 30 years. So how many years of affordable housing do we get when you, in the statement you just made before this?
Excellent question. And, it really depends. And I know that's a non-answer. But basically what you do is, Brian and I are working right now about laying all the projects out over the 10-year period, taking into account any changes you make. But then you issue the bonds for the average life of whatever you're issuing the bonds for. So if you're issuing for fire trucks, maybe it's 15 years. A building, it might be 40 years. So some average for the life of the asset. So I would guess between 20 and 30 years is where this would land.
Okay, thank you. 20 to 30 years because it's a building and that's the average life of the building. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Councilor Nordyke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot on social media by folks who are curious about housing affordability. And by the way, I would say out of all of the engagements I have with people online, affordability of housing has actually surpassed homelessness as the question that is coming up the most, just based on my own anecdotal observations and from the people who engage with me on different social media platforms. I want to tell my colleagues that every time I share that we've spent even a small amount of money to help an affordable housing project happen, it is greeted with enthusiasm, to put it gently. So on the one hand, I'm excited to see that there is an affordable housing opportunity fund. On the other hand, I'm disappointed to see that if you add the $10 million opportunity fund plus the $7.5 million, including the libraries, that only accounts for about 5.8% of this total 300 million bond measure. And I have to tell you, affordability of housing is something that is an enormous concern. I think it is something that needs to be triaged. I'm disappointed that it hasn't made a bigger dent in this 300 million because it's just everyone is talking about it. It's a statewide problem. It's a nationwide problem. The affordability of housing drives people into homelessness. And we are doing a lot, but we have to do more. So that's just a comment as an aside. So let me now transition to what I hear. The only time, well, that's an overstatement. The pushback that I typically receive when I share the news of us working with the Nordstrom Apartments developer or working with URA money, or any time we say we're going to build affordable housing and we're working with a developer to make it happen, the number one concern I get is, are we just cutting developers a check? Are we actually incentivizing affordable housing? Are we attaching the strings that we need to attach so that landlords don't yank the rug out from underneath these low-income tenants within the first year or a handful of years of moving in? So that's something I want to be prepared to address. So on the screen, it says programs typically target rents at 80% average median income level for the county. So what assurances can I give to the public that this affordable housing opportunity fund will hold public and private developers accountable in their quest to build housing and our quest to make more affordable housing?
If I may, so just like I mentioned before, so we entered an agreement with these entities before we provided the funding. And I see Dan popped on. So they'd be restricted to that of those affordable housing units for the life of the bond. However we want to stipulate that. Dan.
Dan Atchison, City Attorney. I'd agree with Mr. Eggleston. There's restricted covenants that are attached to the land, so it's secured by a trust deed as well as a promissory note. In addition, if these projects are tied to federal funding, there's a whole series of HUD requirements that have clawbacks in them. We've done, through the Housing Authority and otherwise, we've done a number of affordable housing developments over the past several years. And we haven't had an issue at this point, knock on wood, that a developer has tried to evade their responsibilities under it.
May I ask a follow-up, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, did you want, let me, just one. Kristen, did you have something you wanted to add to this? No, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So thank you, that's very helpful, and that's the information I need to share. The next question I get is, well, how are you checking? How do you know that they're still charging the rents that they promised to rent for? What enforceability mechanisms are there to ensure that the landlords continue to provide the promised upon rate?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to this one. Kristen Rutherford, interim city manager. We have compliance professionals within the urban development department and the housing authority that when they partner in programs like this, do annual monitorings to make sure that they are meeting those rent criteria.
Okay, so annual monitoring in addition to all of the legal, basically the legal binding contract. Thank you. I think that'll really help, because these are the questions that I am getting with increasing frequency and intensity. I've just seen a huge upswing and concern over the affordability of housing within our area just in my 2 years of joining council. And I know it's going to continue to cause a lot of alarm. So thank you. This is helpful. That's all I have.
Kristen, on that, just following up on this as well, what's the chance we'll get affordable housing built without some sort of public participation? I've had the distinct impression we're having a really hard time with finding developers that will go on their own, that they see it as a...
It's true. We do have a handful of projects that are underway right now because of some programs that have come out through the state in the last 2 years, and also projects using our home and CDBG programs. One of the challenges that we have with all of these programs is it's becoming more and more difficult to find land to build affordable housing on because of the environmental assessment part of the process. It's lengthy, and there just aren't many sites left in Salem that don't have some sort of noise impact or a floodplain impact or other impacts. For example, we've got a site we're working on now for Sequoia Crossings where there was pesticides in the soils from old farm use. And we just have fewer and fewer sites within the city that don't have issues like this. And they just take a really long time to work through those issues. And then the time is money. So a program like this to help come in and bridge the gap to bring those projects to fruition would be very helpful. I know there's been conversation about, is this enough money? As perspective, I think when Vancouver did their bond program, they had $40 million in their program. But what I see, and when I've been talking with staff at the Housing Authority, because of the constraints that we have, I don't know that more money would necessarily net us a lot more projects because of just the limitations on the space. I think our best opportunities for getting more units are doing blended projects like we're doing with urban renewal, where we get affordable units in market rate housing.
Thank you. Okay. All right, Josh.
This next category is future fire stations. So acquire land and construct 2 new fire stations to provide timely response. And just to make sure everyone understands, it's the land acquisition and the construction of the fire stations.
Okay. I'm sure we'll answer questions in this area based on the experience with Station 11 and its being built, opened, and closed for lack of funds to do operations. And as we look forward to what appears to be at least a potential recession, I just wonder if we're this will be done carefully, right? That we aren't going to end up with an open or closed fire station and no firefighters.
Ideally, that is correct. We would not end up in that situation. Just to be really clear, one of these is a relocation from Chemistry Community College. So we already have that resource out there now. So they would just relocate to one of the stations. So we would be looking for an additional fire company to operate out of the second new station.
Okay. Councilor Nordyke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I see that the site of construction of fire stations is estimated to cost $14 million. How did the city arrive at that number without knowing the precise locations for these two facilities?
Great question, Councilor Nordyke. Fire Chief Mike Niblock. What we did is we took the stations that we built in 2007 and 2008, used that square footage and design. They really work well for us, and we don't think we need to re-architect a new facility. They fit into the community very well. We asked engineering with the city of Salem to work with our architectural folks that helped us design these and come up with a cost estimate in today's dollars. As shocking as it may seem, we built 4 fire stations for $10 million in 2007. And to build 2 fire stations, it's going to be about double that cost of what we built them for before. So they were about $2.5 million a piece. We're looking at anywhere between $5 and $6 million, and plus land acquisition. So that's how we came up with the $14 million figure. Of course, if costs keep going up, then that could put a strain on that. But that's how we came up with that figure.
Councilor Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief Niblock, I have a few questions, specifically the precise locations for the fire stations. It's to be determined. Do you have an idea when those locations will be determined? And then the second question is this is just, again, for construction. This is not including staffing or any equipment that you need at these locations.
So I'll answer the first part of that question first. We have determined, as it indicates on the slide, that these will be in the northeast part of town, in the Portland Road area, up above Chemistry Community College, which placed it back in the city limits for the relocation of Station 8, which would require no additional equipment or staffing because we already have the equipment and staffing for that station. So that one could be constructed first, and there would be no additional operating costs to run that facility other than the electrical and those types of things, so very minimal. The other station that we're looking at is southeast Mill Creek area, Lancaster, Cougar type area. We're looking at several properties out there. We haven't zeroed in to say this is the property we're looking at, because that just makes the cost go up on the property, to be quite honest with you. So that's the area we're looking at there. Obviously, as the mayor has mentioned and Josh has mentioned, we would need to make sure that we had operating funds to be able to staff that station before we decided to construct and build that station. We don't want to repeat Station 11's issue again, where we have an empty station with no firefighters in it. So those are the 2 areas that we are looking at. We use a computer modeling system to really determine where to best situate the fire stations to best serve the community for a number of calls and response times. And then the apparatus that we're purchasing now, we will buy enough apparatus to place that station in service within this 10-year bond. So we're looking at buying a few extra fire engines just based on the length of time we've had this fleet. And we spread the mileage out over the entire 15 years. And so we'll have the truck to put that station in service. We just won't have the firefighters.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Councilor Phillips.
This might be a little out of order, but we're talking about fire, so this is for Chief Niblock. I have seen some testimony, and then we had some testimony tonight that was commenting on the fire using the diesel engines. And I'm just curious, like, I've heard that there exists like electrified fire trucks, but where are we at? Is it just too new of a technology? I mean, I know with my car, it's great. Electrical engines are much more simple. There's a lot of upfront cost, but then the cost to operate is so low. So I'm just wondering if you can kind of comment on that.
Certainly. We have just made a visit back to the Pierce manufacturer site in Wisconsin. They are beginning to construct an electric fire truck. It's about 2 years out from actually being for sale. They're actually building one for the city of Portland to do a trial. It's about $1.8 million a copy. We're paying about $650,000 for the diesel truck. So it's about 3 times the cost right now. I think that cost will come down in the future. You know, if you remember the very first electric cars that came out, they were astronomically expensive, and they weren't really, a lot of people didn't have them because they couldn't afford them, but the cost has come down. So I think that will happen with fire apparatus as well. The one misnomer that I think that it's out there for a lot of people is they think it's a completely electric fire truck, and they are not completely electric. They still have a diesel motor in them, even the brand new one from Pierce that they use for pumping water. As you can imagine, that's a pretty labor-intensive thing, and when the electric battery runs out, the diesel motor drives the truck. So they're more of a hybrid than an electric. At least that model is. And then in addition to that, you have the infrastructure that you need to put in your, you know, when you get an electric car, you got to have a plug to plug it in. And this is a 480 volt power supply at each fire station. So there's about 150 grand of infrastructure to be put in place as well. We are looking at this technology. I will tell you that the age and the issues we're having with our fleet right now, it's not going to be ready for prime time for this next fleet. But the one after that, I would assume that, you know, in the next 10 years or so, there are really going to be some advancements in this, and it may be an opportunity that the city takes at that time to go with an electric fleet.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Sorry, I thought of another
go ahead.
question. It's for Chief Nyblock, and it's probably in relation to some of these that aren't just for Chief Nyblock, but when we build a new fire station with the new codes and stuff, are these buildings that would be functional within 24 hours of a seismic event?
So yes, all of our facilities currently are built to the critical standard for a public safety type building. So they are considered to be operational right after an event.
Okay.
They all have emergency power generation. They're all designed to seismically withstand. Now, you know, you have a 9.0 quake, then, you know, that they might not, some of them might not be standing, but they're designed to be operational after a significant event. And so that's the reason. And all of our stations meet that standard right now, and all new stations would be constructed with that standard.
Thank you for that clarification.
You bet.
Okay. All right.
It's a good segue to the next category, Civic Center earthquake safety. So this is the last building of this era that hasn't been earthquake retrofitted. So it would reinforce all 3 buildings. It's actually 3 separate structures at the Civic Center to a life safety standard. So that would allow people to safely exit the building. It might not allow people to reoccupy the building until it's been inspected. It's not to the same category that the fire stations are being built to. It also replaces and reinforces the skylight windows up here, the roof and other systems, and abatement of hazardous materials. It really is focused on the systems. It's not focused on any kind of renovation. So it's just really that life safety, get people out of the building, and then replace the aging systems. And then there's a little bit of funding for the Peace Plaza.
Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you. And Mayor, just as a side note, it's really hard to hear you sometimes tonight. Your mic keeps kind of going in and out. So I wanted you to know that sometimes we can't hear you. And my question—
I wondered why you guys weren't just jumping for joy on all this brilliant stuff I've been saying. Okay. Thank you, Councilor Stapleton. That explains a lot.
You're welcome. Josh, could you or somebody tell us more about the renovations to the Peace Plaza and how much that in that little chunk of this is going to cost?
So there's $2 million allocated. As far as the actual renovation, I'll leave that to Public Works possibly.
Or maybe somebody can get back to me with it.
On the renovation for the Peace Plaza itself?
So there's $2 million allocated for Peace Plaza. Yes.
Yeah, but
for the fountain, what's it for?
Well, there's a lot of spalling concrete out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we haven't really done a master plan, but it would certainly involve removing a lot of that spalling concrete, maybe introducing more greenery. You know, there's a whole master plan that has to be done to, you know, perhaps modernize it and take it out of the 70s.
Thank you so much.
These sharp concrete things out there, I assume they're just designed to make it uncomfortable for anyone to be out there. Aside from the kids that climb it and appear to be constantly about to
There's also a fountain. There's also a fountain.
I was hoping you were going to say
repair.
we're going to fix the fountain. That hasn't gone since I was much younger person. Are you going to fix it?
Yes, we would definitely want to fix the fountain.
Okay. Councilor Phillips?
I'm going to rephrase my question that I asked the Chief Nyblock again here. So I think that this is a different standard, as has been mentioned by Josh. Is this similar, this seismic upgrade and the standard we're improving it to increase the safety and survivability of these facilities, is it similar to what we did with the library?
Yes, it is. It is designed to allow an exiting from the building as safely as possible without reoccupation before a structural engineer can survey it and make sure it's safe for reentry. So it's to help people get out of the building safely during an earthquake.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Hey, Josh, any more?
Okay, last category, technology and cybersecurity. I believe this is 17 million. So the largest portion is a ERP or enterprise resource planning system replacement. And I'll actually see if Krishna is available to talk through the other investments here.
Thank you, Josh. Krishna Namburi, Enterprise Services Director. So the biggest, ticketed item that you see here is the ERP replacement, which is for $10 million. And we do have an item for offsite redundant data center. Right now, in case of an earthquake, any kind of a disaster, we do have backup tapes in Bend, but we don't have a true redundant center to have the city up and running. And so you're looking at that for like $5 million and $2 million for a redundant fiber. This is also to, in case of a disaster, we want to make sure we have an additional fiber that is available for the city to be up and running. And then $500,000 is a system to be able to do the account management and data retention best practices. So that comes down to be like $17.62 million.
Okay. Right. No chance you can make my microphone work, is there?
I see Councilor Phillips has his hand up, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councilor Phillips.
Yeah, thank you, Krishna, for testifying or giving us this information tonight. I guess my question is, I understand a lot of what you presented in the big bullet points tonight, but would this also help secure us as a city in terms of, the emerging threats like ransomware and truly digital threats that exist as well?
Thank you, Councilor. So, Councilor Phillips, so we, especially the ERP system that we have right now, it is 22 or 23 years old. And so when we replace this obsolete system, it does give us the current technology and it's much easier to maintain them. Right now, we do spend quite a bit of time to secure these systems and applying patches and keeping them up to date. The new systems definitely puts us at a much better stage compared to where we are at today.
So it goes hand in hand. By replacing the system, it gets us up to a more, protected modern standard. Got it.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Just for clarification, these systems, one way or the other, needs to be replaced because they are obsolete.
Okay.
Councilor Nordyke.
Thank you. This is a question that I should have asked earlier. Do we have a sense of the locations for the proposed library additions in this bond measure? At least what part of town they would be in?
I'm not sure if we got to that level of specificity. Courtney,
I thought I heard northeast and south. So it's sort of.
Thank you for asking. I think that in conversation, we've been talking about north, northeast, and south, southeast. So one in the north and one in the south to sort of balance the level of service throughout the system.
Thank you.
Councilor Phillips.
Yeah, just regarding the libraries, I think that the line item is $7.5 million, but it also mentions affordable housing. Do we have a rough sense of like what fraction of the 7.5 million would be used for the housing part of it?
So the $7.5 million assumes a public-private partnership for that structure. So there would be a private partner building the affordable housing, and what that $7.5 million would do is get to the shell for the library and would pay for the pre-development costs. So it kind of paved the way for that private developer to come in on that partnership, but it doesn't actually construct the affordable housing.
So again, I hear that it may not be a question that we can answer. We're getting two things. We're getting two community benefits with the 7.5 million with the library and as well as housing, but there's no way to break down how much of that goes towards housing.
No, they're really intertwined as part of the same project.
But would it be fair to say, Josh, that we've got the other bucket, the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund, that's 10 million. Is it safe to say that we are in fact dedicating more than 10 million towards the overall concept of affordable housing because there's some in this bucket for the branch libraries with affordable housing?
Yes, absolutely. The land acquisition and the pre-development costs. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? All right, Josh, what next?
So last slide, just some next steps. You're meeting tonight to review the recommendation. We're hoping to get some general direction from this, from your work session and bring back a package for you on May 23rd. And then from there, we'll test that package with messaging and we'll work on developing the ballot language.
Well, I think you heard what the concerns sounded like. And a lot of it was just, needing more information. Did anyone hear major changes in this that they want to mess with on this, Vanessa? You're on mute, Vanessa.
That. So when I need to make my pitch to the people of Ward 7 about this bond measure, and they ask me, which of these projects is actually going to come to my ward? Right now, I can say great news. 1.5 million out of 300 million is slated specifically for Ward 7. Now, maybe we'll get half of the library / affordable housing, maybe, if it's not situated in Southeast Salem. Maybe we'll get a portion of the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund. But when you look at the streets and sidewalks portion, the 157 million, which is of intense interest to people in my neck of the woods. We talk about sidewalks, we talk about safe crossings for pedestrians, Councillor Anderson's done a wonderful job in past meetings pointing out the number of people who have died in traffic accidents for lack of safe crossings. So when I go to my neighbors and my neighborhood associations in Ward 7, and they ask me, what's in it for Ward 7? There's not a lot I can say. Now, I'm aware of the fact that we need to consider a lot of citywide investments, and this bond measure has a lot of citywide investments that we need to do. Cybersecurity, everyone benefits from that. Upgrades to the Civic Center, everyone benefits from that. Upgrades to fire trucks, everyone benefits from that. So I know all that. I can say all that. But at the end of the day, I still have to tell my people when they ask me, which of these projects is actually coming to my neighborhood? It's next to nothing. That's going to be a tough sell. So one of the things that I would be interested in putting into this and seeing if there's a way for us to make room for it, and I know there's no easy way, would be to upgrade about 6 blocks of Madrona Avenue from Balsam to Croissant to add, and I mean, when I mean add, I mean finish the sidewalk that goes halfway down Madrona. The second half of Madrona, the one that ends in a T intersection with Croissant Creek, is the most dangerous part of Madrona because as cars go downhill, they pick up speed. And I used to live on Croissant Scenic Way. And so my little sister and I would want to walk from Croissant Scenic Way down to Nelson Park. And that was a very scary walk for us. And of course, even though I don't live there anymore, it just helps me understand firsthand why not only myself, but neighbors from this area went to the city staff early on in this process and said, we would like this added to the list of potential projects. So I'd like to talk about that. But I also but before we talk a little bit further about how and whether we could make room for this project, which as I understand it would cost about $8.2 million, according to Peter. Even then, that's still a pretty modest amount compared to what several other parts of the city are slated to receive in street, sidewalk, and bridge repairs. So I can still consider that, I would say, a tweak to the infrastructure bond, not what I would consider major change. But the other comment I have is about process. I appreciate the work that goes into this, full stop. We know that the city staff spends countless hours explaining it and explaining it again to people like me. And the infrastructure committee bond members, thank you for your service. You met 7 times, I think I heard. That's a lot of meetings on top of a very full plate that we have as volunteer members. But my other concern is this work session arrived with every dime of that $300 million accounted for, which means that if you don't serve on the committee, then you have to come here and ask people to redo the math and reshuffle the chairs because you don't like the way that it's structured. Maybe it would make more sense to not bring this project to the full council with every dime accounted for, because then it forces people like me into a position of saying, I have to ask you to cut something to add something. And that can be an awkward conversation, one I'd rather not have in a public meeting. So I offer that as food for thought for the process. When we're considering major projects like this, on the one hand, we benefit from the certainty of knowing how every dollar would be spent. But it also means that those who were not in the room when it happened and cannot legally be in the room when it happened means that we now have to ask, if I want anything changed, I'm going to have to ask you to cut somewhere to make room for an $8 million project or a $2 million project or what have you. So I want to set that awkwardness aside, though, because my ward cares about things like this. For whatever reason, when those homes were built on Madrona Avenue decades ago,
They didn't finish the sidewalks. And I have no idea why or how that was permitted in that area, but what's done is done. And there are plenty of other areas in town that need this funding. So I am coming at this with a desire, on the one hand, to be a zealous advocate for my ward and for my constituents. And on the other hand, I also want to tell them this isn't only about what benefits you directly. There are people in our city in Northeast who need a fire station. There are other parts of town where they don't have any playground equipment, where they have crime and safety issues that are much more intense than in our ward. My ward has the lowest crime rates in town. We have the best parks in the city. Yeah, I said it. Come at me. We have the best tree canopy in town. So I don't expect the bond measure to be 1/8, 1/8, 1/8. That's not realistic. But when I look at $157 million set aside for street and sidewalks and not a dime directly coming to my ward, I'm just telling you what my neighbors will say to me, and that they will push back. And I want this bond to succeed. So help me make this pitch to them. Help me appeal to the desire for the greater good, which sometimes means, yes, I'm going to ask you to support funding projects in other parts of the city because they need it. And there are so many projects on here. I'm like, these are so sorely needed. And I'm happy to do that. And I'm happy to remind my voters of how important it is that we fund other parts of town who don't have it as good as we do. But I got to tell you, it would be really helpful to make that pitch if there was at least some money set aside for streets and sidewalks in my neck of the woods. So I talked to Kristen Rutherford and Peter Fernandez a little bit about that 8.2 million. It'd be helpful if Peter, if you're still on, can you explain a little bit what that would entail and why it's 8.2 million to add the sidewalks and curbs to this area?
Yeah, projects are just expensive, but I think beyond that general introduction, Brian Martin could probably give us the details since his staff put that estimate together.
Hello again. So whenever we do these street widening projects, it's all about right of way, fixing the roads, dealing with stormwater, and bringing it up to the standards that it's set for. So in this case, I believe it's minor arterial. And so it would be that three-lane section with a center turn lane, and then all the sidewalk, right-of-way, stormwater. And also, I think we looked at needing some retaining walls out there. By the time you put the sidewalks in, it goes into the slopes. And to minimize how much land we have to take, we have to build some retaining walls. So things just cost money, unfortunately. And we've inflated all these projects to the midpoint of the bond measure because we don't know what projects are going to be done first and what are going to be done last. And so there is inflation factors adding into it, but that's what things are costing these days.
Okay. Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you so much. Before I get into my ask, I know I was at the Highland Neighborhood Association meeting and they are just getting a couple of, they are getting some upgrades to their sports fields there. But of course, they have lots of needs too as well. And so the conversation that we had was about all of those citywide things that we're getting, right? And how important it is to really create a culture of care where we care about everybody across the city and the areas that have been, historically underserved or those fire stations, one in Northeast Salem is going to alleviate the strain on the rest of the system and make those response times across the system faster. And so I think that's a really important part to drive home for folks. But I do I always support sidewalks and folks who are trying to get around with active transportation. For me, I feel like that's really a strong thing for our future to really rely on is active transportation. Things that, biking and walking are going to be some of the things that really positively affect our climate goals that we've set here at council. And speaking of that, my ask would be to set aside a bucket for protected bike lanes. And I know I've talked to many of you guys about this. You've seen all of the emails come in, but folks who are supportive of this, I think that when we look at this bond being over 10 years, and we're 13 years away from meeting that first point of our climate action goal of cutting our emissions by half, and having single occupancy cars being the leading cause of emissions, we have to do something to get folks out of their cars, and having those different modes of transportation choices available to people is really going to be, in my opinion, the ticket to meeting our goals there as a city. So I would love to see a bucket set aside. And I've talked to staff about this as well. 15 million would be amazing to get those connections, those few blocks missing here or there, to help get really that main north, south, east, west connector for the city would, I think, really be a benefit to all points of the city, and really help every single neighborhood as we move forward.
Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I echo and support both Councilor Nordike's and Councilor Stapleton's comments. She and I are both lawyers, and as such, that is, Councilor Nordike and I are both lawyers, and as such, we place a lot of emphasis on process, and I think she's right on this process. By the time it comes to us, there's really no wiggle room at all. The number is decided, and here's the projects to fit that number. And so in order to alter it at all, we've got to, in order to add something, we got to take something out, as opposed to having some sort of, I don't know, I'll just call it a contingency fund or a reserve fund out of the $300 million that then we could add projects to. I also agree with Councilor Stapleton and the Salem, I think it's called Salem Bike Vision. Did I get that right, Virginia? The proposal that she and others have put forward and that I support, for all the reasons she said. It sure seems to me that I'd like to see something in there more than we have. And, it's the 16th today, and it's got to come back to us on the 23rd. And we've got to make some decisions quickly, because we got to start our campaign for the to get people to pass this bond. And we're going to have to appeal to the broadest number of people we can. And I think this is one way to do it.
Thank you. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to kind of respond back to Councilor Nordike's comments. Couple of thoughts. I think that we have to provide leadership as a council and to remind folks that, we all benefit from projects in the city. I don't just stay in Ward 6. I actually venture out into other wards that I think most people in Salem do. So I'll benefit from things at Minto Brown, even though it's, 9 miles from my house, literally 9 miles from my house to Minto Brown. But I'll benefit because I go there occasionally. I might not benefit if it was in one of the 3 parks in my ward that are all, very underdeveloped in terms of equipment and the facilities. So we all benefit when the overall city benefits. And just in terms of the process, we were presented as a subcommittee with all the money already spent. Okay. And what we did is we went through and decided, well, those are, staff gave us their best suggestions, and we appreciated their great work. And we said, yeah, this works for us, this doesn't work for us, this works for us. And we went through a series of, we started kind of bigger picture, and then we got it down more, we narrowed it down, and we were starting to say, well, what about this project? Yes, no, okay, if yes, then what are we going to cut? And so those are the conversations that we had to have as a committee as well. And so we gave it our best shot. We considered a lot of public input, and we gave it our best shot, and we gave you our best recommendation. Now, if there are specific projects, like I fully support having sidewalks at Madrona. The question is, how we're going to pay for it. I mean, because there are a million other projects that we could include in this thing, but there's just not enough resources. $300 million goes by surprisingly quick when you're talking about projects of this scale. We decided to, for instance, we had a very large project over at Marine Drive, and we decided to phase it. We had, we cut out paving projects in a lot of parking lots in parks because they have paving already. They're just in horrible shape, but we decided that wasn't a priority. So we cut out a lot of different things in order to get the things in here that you're seeing. And so, yeah, I think it would be great to do the project on Madrona. I understand why it's important to that residents in that area. We just got to figure out what to cut. And so we need, somebody has to just, take a shot at, what is it that we're not going to do then? And that's because that's where we're at, is what are we not going to do? If we're going to do something that's not on this list, what are we not going to do? And those are the conversations that the committee worked through. But that's why we're now here, and so we can have it at so all 9 of us can be discussing this. And if there's something that we got wrong, or maybe we just want to tweak, this is definitely the time to do it.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Phillips.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilor Hoy. Well summarized. I think my thoughts are I'm broadly supportive of an effort to fill in. I mean, I just want to clarify that this infrastructure bond is not the bond to pay for the bike vision. That's a different process. We need to be very selective and pick and choose projects that kind of tick off multiple goals at the same time. But that bike vision, which could be more incorporated moving forward into our transportation master plan update, I think it's been alluded to earlier tonight. Tonight is not that. We are behind in an effort. In essence, my understanding is we're behind, and this bond is trying to get us caught up. So we've got a lot of things to do, and this is the amount that we have to spend. And I think that it's pretty tight already. I will take a unique position tonight and say the only things that I would be somewhat comfortable with not funding would be the non-rate limited bridges. So the railings, the cosmetic bridge replacements at Liberty Street over Pringle Creek and Church Street over Pringle Creek, that's about $3.65 million. And that's something I could see as flexible and could potentially go towards other things. But if I add together Councilor Nordyke's proposal for $8.2 million and Councilor Stapleton's proposal for a bucket of $15 million, I'm still almost $20 million short. Like even if we move that $3.65 million. So I don't know where we can eke out enough to get to that. I think those numbers might be too big. But I think these conversations should be earmarked and prioritized for CIPs moving forward. So like even if we don't get to them in this process, we will get to them. And I just want to make sure that we disambiguate the idea that this bond is a bike bond. There happens to be some infrastructure in here that will go towards bikes, but this is not the bike bond. This is the infrastructure bond that every single person running for election this season has said that needs to pass, has to pass. So there's really no debate on the budget committee here tonight or with anybody running for office. This has to pass.
Yeah. I think one of the things to remember is, as you think about this, is how the last major bond like this, the one we're kind of replacing now, has operated. That has gone on for, 15 years? Probably more. I think it probably passed about 16 years ago. And I don't know, are we done using up the funds from that yet, Josh?
There's still a little bit left.
Yeah,
Well,
but we've done project after project that was not included or called out in the bond measure, and the council moved to it as we had funds available. Now, we did have a really great economy, and we're not having one right now. So there is that problem, but we started without a great economy, and it improved as the national leadership began to understand how to drive the economy. And it actually was very successful. I don't know, Peter can probably outline how that worked, but or Josh can with the bond proceeds being able to extend it. And so I think on some of these, you may just not want to give up. You may want to asterisk it as one of the, if we have extra money, look at this, that kind of thing. And then I really think real carefully about what Councilor Hoy described. I think it's really essential to think about. We had to get it to 300 million to bring it to you. You now have to go through that process to try to get by 9 members of the city council. And that really unlike the way we do the budget, which is is not the way it's always been done. You used to have to replace, if you wanted to take $1 out, you had to put $1 in and trade the dollar. Essentially, you didn't put money in, you just traded the dollar. You all are going to have to come up with some way to trade these things out for things that you think 9 people will support. It's a process. It's really actually not a bad process. You're handed a balanced budget, and then you can jigger it if you want to. Jackie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is more of a, I guess maybe more of observations, maybe / question. So I understand that this is a bond measure that's focused on infrastructure building. A lot of the funding is going towards the bare bones, the skeletal parts of the, like for example, the library, being able to purchase land and space and building the library, but not necessarily funding the library itself, as an example. And the fire department, the 2 new fire departments, one of them is already still there. It's just updating it. And then the other one would be building a new fire department. So then is the expectation then within the next 10 years under this bond that there'll be additional funding that we'd be able to pull or get somewhere that would then be able to staff both the libraries, for example, and staff the fire departments?
Appreciate the question. So for the library, the way that would be set up is it could be built as a shell that could be used for something else until funding is identified. The fire station, we wouldn't construct that second one until we had those operational funding secured for that station.
And then I guess my follow-up question to that, and thank you, by the way, my follow-up question, let's just say that we don't have, whatever happens, we don't get the funding to secure to do those things. So if we don't spend the funds within the next 10 years, is it lost or what happens with it?
So the authorization would be for 10 years. So we would issue it at multiple points. The money doesn't go away. We would issue the full 300 million and it would just, sit there collecting, a little bit of interest until we're ready to actually build that station.
Thank you.
Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just 3 sort of short comments. The first one is I certainly remember the savings from the 2008 Streets and Bridges bond that for various reasons, all the projects there were completed and we had money left over. So I'm hopeful that this will happen here, specifically in response to both Councillor Hoy and also Councillor Phillips' discussion along with Councillor Stapleton about the bike projects. I mean, maybe that's where it ought to look at. The other thing is, I also agree with Councillor Phillips that if there is some way to remove some of the money, and I look at the bridges that we're talking about, and especially because of what Chief Niblock told us, that it's the primary fire response and public personal health crisis response can go over these bridges. It's only the secondary ones that might have to go a more circuitous route. And finally, just a process question. I presume now what's going to happen, the staff is going to take this and we're going to have some sort of further recommendation from the staff that comes back for us to look at the next meeting and respond to it. I see you're nodding your head, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, that's what my expectation is, okay. That we will, and the manager's here, she'll actually tell me what we're going to do. So okay. Maybe, why don't we cut out the middleman here and let the boss tell us what's going to happen.
What I'd actually like to do is bring Courtney on board to talk about the schedule because she's managing the polling piece of this. So what we need direction on is in what we could bring back to council on the 23rd and move on to polling, but her voice is working much better than mine tonight. So I'm going to let her speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Kristen. This is Courtney again. And what I would say is that our timeline is getting a little tight, and we had hoped to be able to field a poll as early as the morning of the 24th. And so the way we were considering next steps we were planning to ask the bond steering committee to meet again on June 10. And we can have poll results to the committee June 10 to consider whether any adjustments to the package might be recommended again to council. Our schedule is such that we really need the measure referred on July 18th at your council meeting. We could hold a special meeting on the 25th. But
I would suggest, given, because this is the timeline we've all been operating on, whether we knew it or not, this is what's been in the background has been this, is come prepared to make your case. Frankly, we had one meeting where we dumped stuff as a group, if I recall it correctly, and put in libraries, branches. I mean, that was a decision where one thing came in, one thing went out. Now you can come and do the same kind of process. And we did it in I think one, maybe two meetings. I mean, it was fairly rapid. There's no reason you can't come in and make suggestions at all. And I think we leave it open and let, just exactly what Courtney said, let them then go out with this measure with some of its detail, including change detail, and see what happens with the voters. We're going to hear different things. I mean, I'll get 30 people for the bike vision, or 40 or 50 people, but then I'll hear from Matt Hale tonight saying, get rid of sort of everything except fire and city hall, life safety. And that's a pretty broad spread. So I think we'll hear some real interesting stuff when we go out to poll, and then we get a chance to do a redo a bit on some of the decisions we've made previously and maybe at the last council meeting. But we can stay on this timeline.
If I could just add sort of a technical thing about the way the poll works, is that the poll is testing broad strokes about the measure. So generally speaking, the way we're looking at using the funds by categories, and it might drop a bigger project name here or there just to help the participants gauge what kind of a thing we're talking about when we're using those broad terms. So there, the poll itself, for example, will mention Marine Drive, the portion of Marine Drive that we're talking about building, just to help people understand what kind of new street is being proposed. And then it mentions, Fisher Road, Pringle Road, McGilchrist. So similar to the level of sharing about the bond as you've had experience this evening, although not quite as much detail as we've discussed, but similar in terms of the PowerPoint and just the broad categories. That's what we would be testing.
Okay, great. And I suspect that if we felt strongly, you ought to throw a couple other things in we can ask at least. I don't know what our cost per question is, but I think we could find out. Unless you think you want to slow this down considerably, I'd suggest we stay on your timeline at this point. Do you have any idea on that, Courtney? Do you want to slow this down?
I serve the city.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Vanessa, what do you got?
Thank you. I think we had moved on until I wanted to respond to some of the comments made. First of all, I've been waiting for an opportunity to really talk about all the commentary on the bike infrastructure and the Salem bike vision. I don't feel like we really had a time where we talked about that. So I'll just abbreviate my remarks and say I support 5% for bike infrastructure, full stop, since I get the sense we're coming to the end of the meeting, but I'm supportive of it. So I would like to see us make room for that. I would also
pull it out of other parts and put it together with pieces. I mean, there is bike infrastructure in this. How do you define 5%? I'm not sure.
I think Councillor Stapleton spoke to that earlier, and this is her baby, so I will let her speak to that. But I'd like to finish before we go on to that. I'm supportive of that, and I know she's on the infrastructure bond measure. So I have a feeling that if I say I'm in favor of it, I think it'll happen because enough people, I think, are supportive of it already. And I'm just adding my voice to the chorus. You know, I think there's a lot of work that's being done on where protected lanes go and how that biking infrastructure takes place. But we didn't have a deep dive on that tonight. So I was just going to give a summary comment on that. The other thing, going back to the Madrona topic though, I'm honestly surprised to hear it would be 8.2 million for about 6 blocks of sidewalks. I also heard staff mention a need for a third lane. I don't honestly see a need for a third lane on Madrona. So given in the interest of time, I would love to see just a written, you know, breakdown of how they get to the 8.2. Maybe it's possible to do a more Spartan version just so we have sidewalks. And if I can see it in writing, it'll help me understand how we get to that. Maybe there's a few zeros or a few digits we can shave off here or there to make it more affordable. Because I want us to somehow make this 300 million happen with those edits in mind. Thank you.
Do you, you're planning then to make a motion on Madrona? I want to kind of understand. Is that what you need? Is enough information to?
Well, we're in a work
What do you
session.
have?
Well, we're in a work session, Mr. Mayor, so I wouldn't make.
That's right. No, not now, not now. What you're asking the staff to put together a report, and I'm just trying to understand, is your plan then we would have a motion on it? It's kind of, let's start thinking a little about it as a work session, what we're going to do at the regular session where we start moving forward on this.
Sure. So if we've asked staff to just help explain some of the basic concepts tonight already. For example, you know, we had a lot of talk about bridges and sidewalks. I just want to know how they got to the $8.2 million figure. I don't anticipate that would take staff a long time to do. That's just information I would like to have by the time we're in a position where we can vote. So that's all that I'm asking for now.
Okay, on that one, that goes out to everybody, so we're all working off the same information.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Yeah, I would expect no less. Everyone wants to know why 6 blocks of sidewalks would cost 8.2 million.
I don't know about that, but I think it's interesting to try to find out. Virginia, what do you got?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to start by thanking Vanessa for your support. I really appreciate you vocalizing that. And I did have a question. I guess one thing I wanted to say is that I'm not sure that I would like to see the Peace Plaza redone at this point in time. I'm not sure that that kind of hits my must do in this. And I know it's only 2 million, but when you have so many different projects that are fighting for funds, this might be something that could wait. And then I also wanted to ask about the polling and just wondering if maybe there's a chance to get a question in there about some kind of connected, protected, direct bike infrastructure and whether or not that, you know, in the poll that how that comes out, that would be interesting. And I don't know how that works, but it might be, I mean, we've gotten a lot of feedback on this. And I'm just wondering if that's something that could find its way into the poll. And
let's let Courtney answer that real quick. Okay?
Sure, yeah.
The protected bike lanes could easily make it into the poll if that's the will of the council.
Okay, so why don't you plan on making a motion at least to have it polled? That's the one I was thinking of when I asked about could we do some polling on some of these specifics. That's a fairly substantial addition. It's also going to be controversial. I think it's well worth polling. So,
yeah, I think that there is definitely folks who are really enthusiastic about it, and then folks that struggle to make the connection on why it's important. So you have 2 different extremes, and of course, a lot of people all in between. My last question is about the Pringle Path, and I know that it's an over $7 million project in total. Half of it is being paid for by the urban renewal area. And my understanding in the beginning coming into this meeting was that it was going to take the 10 years to get the funding for that project and that this would be one of the last projects that we were going to do. Tonight, I heard different information about that, which is great. But then my question changes to, is this a project that could be funded in total by the Urban Renewal District within the 10 years of the bond? That would be my only question for staff at this point in time.
We can come back with that answer.
Trevor?
Yeah, thank you. This is a good discussion. This is going to be challenging because of our public meeting rules. So I got to make my comments tonight so as many counselors can hear it at one time. I think that there is a needle we can thread with trying to identify potentially, big bang for the buck bike facilities to connect other facilities that exist. But I'm not sure that the sweet spot is 15 million or 5% of the budget. Even if I'm extrapolating beyond where I'm comfortable, I found 3.6 for the non-rate limited bridges, maybe 2 million for Peace Plaza. We're at like 5.6 million. And then if we get another 3, because we dumped the hanging bridge, the Pringle pathway, all on urban renewal, we're only up to like 8 or 9 million. So, this is getting tight. So I certainly can't see a feasible way forward with how tight this is right now without really spelling out where we're borrowing from to do something like the Madrona sidewalks in Ward 7 and the protected bicycle. And we've got to work on our words on the bicycle thing, because my understanding from you, Councilor Stapleton, is that we want to be really selective and we want to prioritize places where we could link up existing infrastructure. So it's not the bike's vision, it's just what we can do that's big bang for the buck now. So those are my comments. I'm not promising to vote one way or the other, but I just want it out there because it's so hard for us to have these discussions. We can violate the public meeting rules.
Yeah. Tom, you've got to have your hand up, don't you?
No, I actually don't, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate but just because I'm happy to talk. Yeah, even I don't want to hand up. No, I think these are all great things, and I really am interested in potentially another way to do some of the work around the bike bridge under commercial and everything else. And I've had many conversations with Director Rutherford when she was the director and others, how we can make this work. And that's been my baby for all the time I've been on the council. So I'm very reluctant to let it go, and I'm happy to let it go if we have another way to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Virginia.
Yeah, thank you. And Tom, thank you so much for your grace in this situation. I really appreciate that. Just your willingness to have a conversation about something you've been trying to get for so long. I really appreciate working with you. And I agree, if we can find another way to fund it, then let's find another way to fund it and free up some funds for, bike infrastructure that could go, miles to connect folks. And making those links is so important. And I wanted just to confirm what Councilor Phillips was just saying, that, my goal and my focus is to connect the wonderful existing infrastructure that we have and connect it so that it's fully connected. Is the Salem Bike Vision is something that will come later and in a different process altogether. And I think, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Are you concerned at all about the transportation system plan and how much you are proposing to put into the bike, that we might be investing heavily in an old setup because of the current transportation system plan we have?
No, thank you for bringing that up. The Salem, the transportation update is something that I'm really looking forward to and hoping to really influence. And that is a question that I've had for staff. We are shifting and changing, and the needs of the city are shifting and changing, but yet we're functioning right now off of an old transportation plan, right? So how does this all work together? And I know that the transportation master plan update is going to take some time, as in, I think, years to update. So how do we marry, this bond is really about the future of Salem, but we're kind of dealing with some structural past kind of infrastructure requirements that aren't really where we're at anymore. So I don't know how to fix that. but it is something that I'm thinking about and wanting to really heavily influence as we move into the fall. But I don't have the answer for that. Maybe staff do. But you did mention something that I wanted to say, that I am flexible on the number that, you know, we can set aside.
Good.
And so, and staff know that as well. I've had conversations with them about, you know, how I want to be flexible. I also want to advocate for as much as we can, because climate action is so important to me. And I see this as really a big step in our future. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, the only concern I have is whether you have the cart before the horse. And yeah, I can understand maybe there's a majority on the council that want to go this direction right now without even going through the process it takes to get there. But that can change. I mean, we're sitting here, we don't know what tomorrow night's going to bring us. We don't know if in 2 years what it's going to bring the community. And that leaves it sort of up in the air without, where you're talking about a future that you want, but whether or not the voters want it, you know, whether or not that's the, and this is the first time voters will have heard of this. You know, it's been in the paper, I think. But you see what I'm saying? It's like, is it too early to go too far with this and start cutting out projects that have already been vetted? That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, and I thank you, Mayor. And I also want to say that I'm really, this whole thing really came from all of the conversations that I've been having with constituents and at neighborhood association meetings, where people are repeatedly asking for protected bike lanes and repeatedly talking about climate change as their number one thing. Not number one. We have so many number ones, don't we? We have climate change, we have affordable housing, we have homeless crisis, all the things. And I understand that. But so it's not just me, right? Okay. I want to say that very loudly. That is not just me. You know, we saw all the emails come in. We go to the neighborhood meetings, we talk to folks, and so this isn't just me, right? Okay. And so I am also very, very excited about it. And
well, I didn't think it was just you, but I was thinking there is a process. Everyone talked about process there for a few minutes. This goes around the process and doesn't include process. And what I worry about is there would be a huge period of disappointment when you try to put some of this into practice in the face of our current transportation system plan, our certain standards, or, you know, all of those kind of messy issues that come with doing public projects. So I hope you'll take some time and think that one through, because I'd sure like to hear an answer from you or one of the other advocates on how that all fits together. I think it's an important problem for me to understand, because I've been real supportive of this kind of process, and it has bothered me tremendously how slow it's been to do. But I've also understood that we had to go through a transportation system plan to get this far. And, you know, it is there's no quick fixes. And I want to make sure I understand how your fix works. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I know I talked to Director Fernandez at the last meeting that we had, just saying, you know, can we get money set aside and then, you know, change the system? And he said, well, sure, you know, like, it's not normally done that way, right? We normally change the system and then we find funding for the projects. But having the funding set aside and changing it is not, you know, not something that we can't do. It's something that we haven't done in the past, right?
Yeah. Maybe for good reason. That's why I want to hear your thinking on it. Vanessa?
Thank you. So as we consider how to fit everything we want into $300 million, I again will refer back to my experiences in being involved in a lot of differently scored processes. I've scored RFPs for the Department of Justice. I've scored RFPs for the Marion County Sheriff's Office. I've scored grant applications for the City of Salem Social Services Advisory Board. So a couple suggestions as we consider how to make everything fit. Look at the scoring. Items that are scored lower might not be as high of a priority. If they were a higher priority, they would be scored higher. So if you're looking for somewhere to make a cut or a removal, you might want to start with the lower scored projects within their own categories for the reasons we discussed earlier. but don't consider that alone. For example, when we look at all the bridge ideas, the bridges were all scored in the 40s, 43, 42, 45, 40, etc., but they don't all cost the same. For example, the Mission Street Bridge over Pringle Creek rehabilitation scored a 45, but it costs less money than some of the other bridge projects, significantly less money than some of the other bridge projects. So for example, it costs $810,000 under this proposal. Whereas, if you compare that to other things, you can see that sometimes the score, look at how well it's scored, look how much it costs, those two relate to each other. If we're going to make hard decisions, if we're asked to take a $300 million deal and we want to make any changes, I encourage us to not do it in a willy-nilly fashion. Look at all the time we've already invested in estimating what these projects cost, why they're scored the way they are scored, what public benefit they provide, and that might help us guide staff in terms of making the changes that we want made. So I just want to throw that out there because I've been in this situation before where there's not enough funds to accomplish all of the objectives. So take a look at that work, think about which communities are most underserved, and let those be guides. That would be my suggestion to staff, because we're going to leave them with some options tonight, and someone's going to have to do some long division after this meeting, and it won't be me. But I hope that by providing some guidance along the way, that this is helpful to our staff in their infinite patience with us.
Okay. I would remind you, everyone here who's been on for at least a few years has served on the budget committee. You've never had enough money to do what you want to do. So you've been through this process many times before, I'm sure. So I think apply some of that kind of thinking, that you can defend issues in the face of the reality of it's this project or this project, and have the projects in mind you want to pull. I think that'll help us on the 23rd to get through this. I hope you'll come prepared if you want to make a massive change or any change, that you'll be willing to stand up and say, let's cut this. And that'll be really essential, I think, to get there, is to have those kinds of motions prepared. I don't know how else to do it. So I look forward to it. I'm sure you will too. Mickey?
I know everyone's ready to call it a night, but I just thought I'd just add, I mean, this has been really, really helpful since I haven't been through this process before. And I just really, really appreciate all the comments. And in terms of prioritizing projects, I mean, I can kind of see where the Peace Plaza and maybe the bridge railing for their $3.5 million might fall lower on the list. But one of the things that was brought up at West Salem Neighborhood Association meeting a couple of months ago was a kind of a caution to creating too many open buckets that don't have specificity, because it's harder for folks to want to approve something when they don't know exactly where the funding is going, what it's going to be spent on and where they stand on it. I just wanted to mention that. So as we're thinking about buckets for, I mean, I think the bike projects are great too, but we also have buckets for sidewalks and for crosswalks, for the safe crossings. So we might want to think in the future a little bit about how we're going to prioritize the projects that fit into those buckets. Just wanted to throw that out. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, the 23rd is going to be a really interesting meeting. Look forward to how you all come in. I hope you will, as you need to also, even if you didn't bring it up tonight, call the staff and get their read on this. I think it'll be important that they can kind of speak up on some of these issues, not just on the fly, that they're aware of what you have in mind and what some of the details of it. I just think it'll make it a smoother run if, when we hear your proposal, we can turn to the appropriate staff member and get a kind of a clear read from them without them having to return to do another round of searching on this stuff or trying to figure out what we're after. So Is there anything else tonight that you want to go over? Are there any other thoughts for how you'd like to have the meeting conducted? And if you don't have a thought tonight, but for the meeting on the 23rd, how you'd like to have that conducted? The reason, if you don't have it, feel free to email me with any ideas you have. It's helpful because this will be difficult. I mean, or could be, might be real quick. We might just get a couple of motions, they'll fail. Then we'll move the 300 million and we're done. I mean, that also can happen. So think about how you'd like to approach this if there's something specific you think we ought to be doing.
Mr. Mayor, you're fading in and out. It's getting harder to hear you again.
Is it? I'm sorry. Tell me if you have any ideas on how you'd like that meeting run on Monday. I mean, you know, how would you like to do it? If you have any thoughts, that's helpful. Because we need to, what it'll require is motions and voting to get from here to there. So that's the most important thing. But are there any other thoughts you might have? And if you have any ideas, you're going to make motions specific to cutting or adding things, get in touch with the staff and make sure they're prepared or at least aware of what you're doing. You can't get them to write your motion maybe, but you can get them to come to the, you know, have some idea of what's going on so they're ready. I think that's helpful. Yeah, Trevor.
Yeah, I mean, the motions could succeed, but to get successful motions, I would appreciate specificity.
Yeah.
You know, that's going to be very helpful. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Kristen.
Yes, I would like to just bring Courtney back to go over again the agenda for Monday, because it will largely be focused on putting together what will go out for polling.
So the question on the 23rd is whether to direct staff to engage in more public opinion research on the bond. What we're discussing right now isn't necessarily going to result in an impact in the categories of funding. So the pie, we like to affectionately refer to it as the pie. So it won't really have an impact on the broader categories because we're looking at taking some things out of transportation and putting them in other parts of transportation. So I think we're okay there. The possibility of structuring a question around protected bike lanes, I'm confident our pollster has experience in making that make sense to a broader population. And so making those missing connections in protected bicycle infrastructure is something I'm sure we can get an idea for. So the bigger question about what projects are in and what projects are out, it affects our messaging and communications immediately and throughout. So right now, if you go to the city's webpage, you'll notice that we're listing some of these key projects that we've heard about this evening. We are not currently showing some of these other ideas that are coming up this evening. So just be aware that the 23rd may be an opportunity for us to be clear about the projects and whether we're shifting funds, and we can update that messaging and communicate as quickly and clearly as possible after we get your decision on the 23rd. So right now the structure is there's a project list and a pie attached to the report. If you choose to influence or change the project list, we can do that in our communications on the 24th. And I don't think it would have a measurable impact right now on the poll. So we could still meet the overarching timeline and make get that feedback quickly.
Okay, so what you're saying, Courtney, is we don't need to go through this process on the 23rd. Are you saying that or what?
As long as yes, we do not need to go through this process to achieve a poll as quickly as possible.
Okay.
But the issue remains, we are not communicating the full scope of the bond because the bond is still in flux. So the timeline to get to November is still of concern. Messaging correctly and what is in the bond is really of concern. The poll helps, but messaging right now every day is really where we need to be moving quickly.
Do you want us to go through this vetting process or not?
The sooner we have the complete measure, the better off we will be in communicating the council's intent for the measure on the ballot.
But that could also change following the results of the polling.
Yes, on June 10th, if the council committee receives the poll and has some ideas about changing up that would also come back to council. So it's just confusing, I think, in the community because the measure itself is complicated. So as soon as we know what we're talking about for certain, it would benefit everyone.
So, Mr. Mayor, I think I can give a final summary, I think.
Good. If you can make sense out of that, I'll take it.
I think I can. As I understand it, what our goal is at our next meeting is to come up with like our best final draft. And we're going to send staff out to see how does that work? Like, how does this work in the public's eyes? This final draft list. They're going to bring those results back to us, and we're going to factor in all of the arguments that council makes. We're going to factor in all of the poll numbers that we hear, and we're going to say, okay, this is what the $300 million looks like. And now we're going to finalize that list, and we're going to refer it to the ballot. And as long as we do that by July, I think it was 18th or somewhere in July, we're good. So this is all preliminary work to get us to that point, but Courtney really needs like our best final draft. And then we can still tweak it. I mean, it's not our last shot at it on Monday, but it should be really close to our last shot. So okay. I would ask my colleagues, if you're planning to bring a motion that adds projects, I would hope that you would include in your motion something that eliminates an equivalent amount somewhere else. So we have to have at least have to have a starting point in terms of, because this is a zero-sum game. We got to stay at 300 million, right? And so the closer that you can help us get there, the better. If you're going to propose to spend more, you got to tell us where you think we can spend less. And so I would hope that everybody in doing their homework with staff is ready to do that. Now, again, I don't think Monday will be our last shot at this. We'll have one more. But I would also just like to, and this is a little bit off topic, but a comment for staff. I hope that if you have anything else planned for our agenda on Monday that's big, i.e. our Salem, anything else that might take significant discussion, I certainly hope you put that off to a different meeting and not have it this Monday. That's just my take. Thank you.
Yeah, I just really agree with you, Councilor Hoy. I think you're right on the money. I think if we don't do some work on getting down to specifics, we're going to still be thrashing around on this thing. And I think the ideas that have been proposed are not that big. I mean, so far tonight, I haven't heard anything that, if it happened, it would put an end to the whole process and hope for a bond. But that's why I think kind of measuring what the council's feeling is on this as soon as you can get a sense. And like you say, we can continue the draft, and we're going to continue the draft till we set the bond measure anyway. But I hope we can get some resolution on some of this stuff. Yeah, Kristen.
If you are anticipating making motions on Monday, it would be very helpful to Josh and his team to have that emailed ahead of time so that they can do that math not on the fly the night of the meeting.
Right. That's what I'm asking too, is that whether it's money or whatever it is, make sure we have our staff prepared to answer questions. And all they have to do is know what you're thinking about. Don't ask them to write your motion, I think is probably the main thing. Is there anything else? I don't think so. Yeah, Kristen? Kristen, did you want to? No. Okay. So we'll adjourn. We'll be back the 23rd. Be prepared let's start to get this thing vetted and get rid of Tom's Hanging Bridge, it sounds like. Has been a long time. Okay. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
For more videos and for more information, go to capitalcommunitymedia.org and follow us on social media.